Assembly special session, which was held last year, all of it speak about greater coordination around anti-corruption, greater respect for the UN Convention Against Corruption, and greater adherence to local laws. And many of these center around lawyers. The vulnerability of lawyers to corruption, definitely, but more importantly, the proactive work that lawyers can take on. And once again, I wanted to thank the Bar Council for what is going to be a very important, interesting morning and conversation that we will have throughout the day. And I hope this is just going to be the first of many such events, because the collaboration looks very interesting and it looks very promising. Thank you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. So with that, we would like to invite Encik Muhammad Ezri Abdul Wahab, Vice President of the Malaysian Bar, to deliver our keynote speech. Over to you, Ezri.
Thank you very much. Very good morning to all. Assalamualaikum. This is Gabriel, Founding Director of the C4 Center, dignitaries from various high commissions and embassies, member of the media, ladies and gentlemen. I am very pleased to speak to all of you. Welcome. I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to C4 for co-organizing this event with the Malaysian Bar. C4 and the Malaysian Bar has always had a close working relationship, and we are happy to continue this tradition of effective collaboration. Today's seminar about anti-corruption is a matter that is close to all our hearts as Malaysians. Thank you for letting me share my thoughts on this issue with all of you. According to Transparency International Corruption Index, CPI 2021, Malaysia has dropped 5 spots to the 62nd position out of the 180 countries in terms of public sector corruption. In 2020, we ranked 57th, and in 2019, we ranked 51st. This consistent drop in rank over the years is concerning and alarming, to say the least. I am not sure whether Malaysia has set a target to be the number one. Corruption is not a new subject. I was first being introduced to this through my reading of the Malay Delima written in 1970 by our now Tun Mahathir. My observation, in short, it seems things are escalating. There is an urgency to discuss what needs to further done to remedy this perennial problem that has become endemic in our society. Corruption targets human rights because it gives certain individuals added advantage over another. It subverts equal access to rights that should be made available to everyone. It subverts and not just a select few from the higher echelons of politics and society. It siphons the resources from their intended purposes, thereby stifling prosperity, growth and the development. As a country, Malaysia has continued to fare badly in terms of global perception, service of corruption. Our country has become synonymous with corruption ever since the startling revelations of the 1MBE scandal in 2015. I believe Malaysians are far from what is being perceived, and Malaysians now have a duty to correct this perception. Malaysians are people with great integrity. I would like to suggest a few strategies that could prepare for this to happen. Firstly, in 2015, the Malaysian Bar, in collaboration with C4, the Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs Ideas, Citizens Network for a Better Malaysia, CNBM, and Transparency International Malaysia, TIM, submitted a joint memorandum to the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission, setting out our proposals to reform the MACC for it to comprehensively address and deal with corruption. The purpose of the memorandum was to propose comprehensive reforms to the MACC and to fund this to effectively stamp out corruption in Malaysia. We hope efforts will be taken to look into and act upon the memorandum as one of the strategies to bring back trust and correct the perception of what Malaysia is. Secondly, the Malaysian Bar has always voiced its concern about the precarious position of the MACC. The MACC, the institution that was established to fight corruption, falls within the purview of the Prime Minister's department where it receives funding for its operations. This undoubtedly raises the questions of whether the MBCC can be entirely free of any political interference from the executive. One of the key concerns that the Malaysian Bar, C4 and other civil society organizations have faced in the past is whether there can be a true accountability and good governance. When an agency that is specifically tasked with combating corruption is not a wholly independent one, this can raise questions of selective investigations. This can create an ineffective model to truly eradicate corruption, as there is a fundamental lack of independence. Thirdly, ladies and gentlemen, one of the topics that we will hear about is the need for a greater access to information by the public, and the importance of activists, the media, the journalists to scrutinize public interest issues, especially those that pertain to the integrity of our public institutions. This group have great role to play in the fight against corruption, as they can demand transparency and accountability from those in positions of authority, be it the public or the private sector. We would love to read stories of Malaysian journalists who put passion and interest for the love of the country in searching for and revealing the truth that would correct wrong and put a stop to corruption. The champions that would truly deserve an award in investigative journalism. It is only through press freedom and the freedom of speech that this could be achieved. It is also with the same public interest issues can be unveiled and communicated to the rakyat in a transparent manner rather than operating under the guise of opacity. The truth is always exciting. Investigative journalism, therefore, is crucial and exposing corruption in supporting anti-corruption efforts. Is these activists and journalists, as well as civil society organizations like us, that confront parties with questionable integrity and act as a catalyst to seek for a greater accountability from those who govern us. Fourthly, another key example of how corruption can be stamped out or at least ameliorated is through the enactment of political financing legislation. The grey area, the dark side, should be addressed. Money and politics are like irama dan lagu yang tidak dapat dipisahkan. We would like to stop the interference and disgust thrown at our politicians. If proper regulation is put in place, it will no longer be a subject that could be politicized. I personally feel we could have more honest and credible Malaysians entering into politics. We must do our part to ensure there is a fair and safe ground for these people to stand on. One of it is by enacting the political funding legislation. The Malaysian Bar has always stood by the view that there is a need to enact political financing laws in our country without any delay. There is a dire need for good governance and transparency relating to activities carried out by politicians and political parties, especially in the process of managing political funds. Malaysian Bar has spoken about this issue on various occasions, and it bears reminding that in the absence of proper laws to comprehensively address issues on how political parties, politicians and campaigns are financed, there will forever be a legal and practical lacuna in the law on how to stamp out corruption. And lastly, we will also be hearing about questions relating to whistleblowing and its role in fighting corruption. In 2010, the government enacted legislation known as the Whistleblower Protection Act. This was one of the initiatives set out by the government then, known as the Government Transformation Plan, a plan to bring about changes to fundamental institutions. Whistleblower protection and the curtailment of corruption go hand in hand. The objective of the Malaysian Whistleblower Act is essentially to encourage and facilitate disclosures of improper conduct in public and private sectors, to protect persons making those disclosures from detrimental action amongst others, with the aim of combating corruption and preventing wrongdoing. However, according to a study conducted by C4, although this legislation has been in place for more than a decade, the number of whistleblowing reports are underwhelmingly low. taking into consideration the rampant corruption cases that are revealed to us on a regular basis. Given the endemicity of corruption in Malaysia, it makes us ponder the reasons as to why more in public and private sector do not raise such complaints despite being potentially aware of blatant wrongdoing. A conversation must be had about better and stronger protection mechanism for whistleblowers. As I understand it, C4 is in the process of working towards the creation of whistleblower support system to better enhance the protection of whistleblowers. We will hear more about it later. I will not dive into much detail about the topics that our subject matter experts will be discussing about later in today's session. And ultimately, I think we are all here because we want a cleaner and fairer society. United Nations Convention Against Corruption, UNCAC, recognizes the role of civil society in the fight under Article 13, where it calls on government to improve public access to information and to promote public contributions to decision-making process. It is through well-developed civil society that a wide range of interests can be discussed. Such voices will allow us to see the problem of corruption from diverse perspectives and for us to come up with effective strategy to bring an end to it. Some would say that this is a lost cause. The effort seems like taking one step forward and two steps backwards. For me, I have not seen an effort that has not achieved its objective. If a clear objective is being set, a long-term action plan is agreed upon, and a consistent effort being put into the objective will transform to be a reality. Malaysia has done and achieved a lot. We have climbed Everest, went to space, and even changed our government. For a country, we are still young, 65 years of age. Fighting corruption is possible. Let us call upon Malaysia to be merdeka from corruption. I would like to thank organizers and all those who are involved in planning and making today a reality. With that, I look forward to hearing from our distinguished speakers about their thoughts on the interesting topic of anti-corruption. Thank you, and I hope you have a productive session today. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you very much, Azri, for the keynote speech this morning. I hope everyone has been paying attention and feeling inspired about our fight against corruption in Malaysia. So to start off this morning's session, we'd like to update that the agenda has been updated that session 1, if you're expecting the original session, we have now actually merged the SLAC session together with this session on climate crisis, journalism, and the need for greater access to information. So with that, I would hand over to the moderator of session 1 on climate crisis, journalism, and the need for greater access to information, Sunagaran Stanley, Program Manager of C4 Center.
Thank you. Today, can I invite the panelists to come on stage, please? A very good morning to all our guests and members of the PAR, civil society, comrades, and all the members of the public who are joining us online today. Thank you so much to our panelists who are here and also who are joining us online from different parts of Malaysia and also from US. We have two of them who are joining in right now. It's night for them. Thank you really so much for joining us in this very, very important and crucial topic that we would want to actually discuss today, and really in this time where the country is actually struggling to recover from the pandemic, the political instability that we are all forced to put up with, and at a time where corruption, scandals after scandals are being exposed with no end in sight. So we are here to actually discuss very important four main areas that complement and relate to each other. Basically, it's the right to information, whistleblower protection, journalism, and how the three of these actually affects environmental governance and the climate crisis in our country today. Now, for this, we have 6 distinguished speakers, which I will introduce in a couple of minutes. Now, if you have a question, to all those who are joining us online, kindly please type your question into the question box, and I'll pick up those questions at the end of the presentations, and I'll bring on to the panelists who are here with us today. So without further delay, I would like to introduce our first panelist today, Mr. Lau Yao Hua, who is a freelance science and environment journalist and podcaster as well, based here in Kuala Lumpur. Now, he co-founded and runs the Makaranga portal. It's a Malaysian environmental journalism portal. His stories has won multiple awards, including the One World Media Award 2020 and the Malaysian Press Institute Award 2021 for environmental reporting. Welcome, Yao, to this presentation session today. It's just that in your presentation, I just hope that you cover the question as in your experience and in your work as an environmental journalist for the last couple of years, we hoping that you could cover some of your experiences in regards to the obstacles that probably you had faced in performing your duties due to the absence of the right to information law in this country, and even due to different various secrecy laws such as the OSA, banking laws, and so on, and how actually this has actually affected your work in reporting on the environment and carrying out your duties effectively. So over to you, Yao.
Right, thank you, Stanley. Good morning, everyone. This is thanks to C4 and the Bar Council for this opportunity to share our experience with everyone. This is the first time I've given many talks, but this is the first time I'm actually speaking to lawyers. Glad to meet you all. Maybe one day I'll need your help. So yeah, glad to meet you all. So as Stanley said, so I'll be sharing our experience on the information barriers that we encounter when we do environmental journalism here in Malaysia. Now, the experience or the obstacles that we face here is not unique to Malaysia. There are many countries that I think have it far worse than Malaysia, but we do have our problems here. So let's go to the next slide. Right. So I only have 12 minutes, so I'll be quite brief. So what I'll do is I'll explain a bit on what journalists do and the information that we need to actually play our roles, and give 2 examples, or maybe 3, on how those obstacles obstruct our work. So as journalists, of course, we report the truth, the truth as far as we can get it, as best as we can get it. And the purpose of doing that is to hold whoever's in power, whoever has the power, accountable for their actions and the consequences of those actions, and to better inform public discourse on whatever it is that concerns their day-to-day lives, to help them make better decisions. Now, that's the purpose of journalism, or at least as far as journalism as Makaranga practices. So, the information that we need, would be environmental impact assessment reports, forest reserves area, and operation licenses. And there are a lot more information that an environmental journalist would need to run, to do the job as well. But I'm going to focus on these 3 because I'm going to focus on forest areas specifically, stories on forests. And I choose forests because, well, that's what Makaranga does a lot, and also because if you look at this graph, right? So this is information sourced from our government itself, and it shows us the carbon emissions from Malaysia for several years, 2016, from 1994 all the way to 2016. Now, you will find different variations of this information, but this is sourced from the government itself. The one in red is carbon emissions if we if they exclude the carbon absorption or the carbon sink that is forest. And you can see with forests, it absorbs a lot of our carbon emissions. And so what we get, the net emission is just the one in black. So the difference between the red and the black bars is the contribution of what our forests absorb every year. And as we all know, carbon emissions contribute, is one of the direct factors, direct drivers of climate change. So yeah, so this is why it's a good reason for us to focus on forest investigation and how forest use, integrity in forest management and forest use would relate a lot to the welfare of our country and of our people. So these are the information that we need. I'll give a few examples to illustrate the obstacles that we face. I think the first example I'll use is the one that many of us are familiar now. And last month, several floods have ravaged the villages in. So I mentioned here Kampung Iboy, but several other villages have been afflicted in the area, in Baling Kedah. So if you all recall, it was like this huge, floods, right? Debris flow is what the official report now says. A flow of, like a flood of rocks, logs, mud, silt, all of those things came down from the mountain Gunung Inas Forest Reserve, rushed into the villages. In the end, it unfortunately led to 3 deaths. 3,500 people were either displaced or affected in one way or another, and then the estimated loss was 26 million ringgit. So what's the cause of this? And who should be held accountable for this? Here I show you the image that we did of the area. You see Kampung Iboy there. The black outlines are outlines of forest reserves. You see Gunung Inas Forest Reserve to the south of Kampung Iboy, and then it circles around to the northeast of Kampung Iboy. And that's a mountainous area, so actually you can see in pleasant times when nature is intact, Kampung Iboy will be sitting in a very beautiful valley with the river Sungai Kupang running down from the Gunung Inas area. But in the last decade, the villages in that valley have been complaining about river pollution, the pollution of their water supply, they say, due to rampant forest clearing up in the mountains, up in the hills, right? They have been complaining about it to the government, to the authority since 2010. But the projects, were approved, and then the projects proceeded. If we fast forward to what we see in the last month, the villagers were saying that the floods were caused by rampant clearance in that red circle that you see just south of Kampung Iboy, and they say that was due to either forest plantation or durian plantation, right? And that began, and that was cleared in 2019, and we know because we have satellite images. Now, of all the information barriers, satellite images is the one that's one of the easiest to get, so there's very little barrier there when it comes to satellite images. Now, what we could not get is, from the satellite image, you can tell, you can more or less say what happened there and when, if you have a very clear satellite image, but it does not tell you who did it. It does not tell you who owned the land, who manages the land, who did the logging, who had the logging permits. So this whole story is a bit convoluted, as you could see from the media reports, right? What happened, all the changes in companies and projects between 2010 and now, right? Yes, just 2 days ago, I went to the Department of Environment to look up the EIA report of the forest plantation that was approved. 5,000 hectares, all of it, that was approved to the south and to the north of Kampung Iboy. It's more or less exactly the 2 red circles that you see now. And it was a very thick document, about this thick. Basically the width of my palm, and it's double-sided. So it's printed on 2 sides, not even one side. So you can imagine the amount of information in the EIA report. That was 2013 for forest plantation. Somehow it changed, and then it became durian plantation, a small part of it at least. And so, who should be held accountable? In the EIA report, it was one company, then later it changed, so we could not find any of the EIA report for the change to the durian plantation in 2019, allegedly. And who were given the logging permits? Who were responsible for logging the land? Now, the land belongs to the state government because it's forest reserve, but who were given the logging permits to log it, and did they do a good job? So these are the whole power accountable, to hold the responsible stakeholders accountable. We need all this information, right? So people would know that there are consequences, and we couldn't get it, right? We couldn't get it, and so this is all I'll say for now on this story. Because Macaranga did not report this story at all. So I'm just getting it from research that I did of late, and also from reports of my other media friends. And okay, so the next example is one that we did in Johor, in Kampung Labong. Here in Endau, is just about 20 minutes north of Mersing. We have about 600 hectares of forest cleared, not on a forest reserve, but it's forest cleared, and it was developed into an oil palm plantation even before the EIA report was approved. So this, as far as we could tell, this is really against the regulations. And DOE themselves told us that they did not receive, they had not approved this approval. It's being under investigation now. And so what it has led to, the destruction of this forest, have led to the villagers saying that they have seen escalated elephant conflict with the villagers and the other plantations, and also polluted rivers. That has led to like 80% drop in their river catch. Now here, what was the information barrier that I faced when I was looking this up? So we had to do this really quickly, and there was the EIA, because the EIA was submitted, and then so we could actually download the whole copy of the EIA online. But what was missing in the EIA, as I said again, who owns the land and who were given the logging permits? Did they or did they not know that they have to the land, and who were given the logging permits? Did they or did they not know that they have to have the EIA approved before they could do it, right? So I need to know who were responsible before I could actually, ask them, right? Because we need to verify all these things and be fair about it. But in this EIA report, the appendix that shows land title, the appendix that shows logging permits, all we got is this. This document is restricted only for the Department of Environment. Now, this is the first time I've seen such a the document replaced by this, restricted only for DOE. It should be available for public to review and then to provide the feedback, right? But we don't get it. It's only restricted. I went to DOE, the library. Land titles and logging permits must be given directly to, I assume, would have been given directly to the DOE officer, but not available for public review. So they assume would have been given directly to the DOE officer, but not available for public review. So in the end, how did we check the land titles? We didn't manage to check the logging permits. No, we couldn't. We had to ask the State Forestry. I asked them, they did not reply. The land titles, you could get it from the Johor Land Office, but for these 6 land plots, we had to pay more than 1,000 ringgit, or close to 1,000 ringgit to get all these 6 land plots. So it's a cost there, which should have been given available freely in the EIA. So having said all that, I must say, so those are some of the barriers that we face. It just incur extra cost, extra effort from us, time and money. And sometimes regardless of how much effort you put in, you can't get the information unless the officers, the authority releases it to you, right? And having said that, I must also, sometimes I make it sound like, some of the departments are really bad in providing information. Now, DOE has been quite helpful in providing information among all the departments that I have encountered, but they are somehow still limited. I don't know, their policies or something in providing the information. Another important information to get is the State Gazette that we now have to pay before we can actually access them. And we are also hoping, just in line with the rest of the talks that we'll have today for whistleblowers, I've never ever had any like whistleblower from within the government approached us. That would have been great. I do not know if there is such a platform in Malaysia for that, but I'm also part of the Pulitzer Center's Rainforest Investigation Networks. And for the Pulitzer Center, we do have an online platform where anybody can just submit their tips, whistleblower, and it's all safe and protected and stuff. So if anybody wants to provide any information for investigation to rainforest journalists, you can do so by just look up the Pulitzer Center and you'll be able to find it. Yeah, so hopefully this changes, the situation changes, the information barrier comes down, and then we journalists can do better work. Thank you.
Thank you. Check. Yep. Thanks, Leo, for the fantastic presentation. It's quite interesting. You touched about the whistleblower portal. Something that we could discuss shortly is to imitate as an example, probably with Arif and rest of the panelists. But I also note that most of the information that you wanted to actually get here from, you list out like the what we call that, the EIA reports and the other information. These are actually information that is supposed to be accessed without an RTI law, right? It's supposed to already be there for the public to actually access, right? But you are saying it's even hard to even get these basic documents out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, from our viewpoint, of course, right? It should be public property. It's for the EIA, for example. It's a wealth of information. Like really, the EIA, I think I can make a story out of several stories out of every EIA report. And it's well, it is publicly available for 30 days. Once the EIA report is submitted, and then for 30 days it is for public preview and for public to keep.
And you can't take picture, and you can write.
Oh, you can take picture on screen. Is different. I don't want to give developers ideas, but
okay.
But it's different. Sometimes you can download it, sometimes you can't download it. But the best is if you can just download the whole thing, then it'd be great. And that should be the practice going forward. That should be the practice, I repeat again. But then the issue is after that public review period, right? Then it's taken down, and then sometimes it's available in the Putrajaya DOE library. Then we can go there and then we read it there, but then you can't take pictures there. So it's like you have to take everything down by note or photographic memory. But I must say, they are helpful where they can be helpful. I must give them credit. But then it also begs the question: the DOE receives soft copy of all this. They are supposed to receive soft copy of all these EIA reports. Why not just give us the soft copy? I mean, I'm a journalist. My role is to help you, not help you. My role is to monitor, right? And if the government officers always say that we are short of staff, we don't touch manpower to do all this, I'm doing it for free, I'm for example, all this like Labong and not just me, of course, not just Makaram, but all the journalists are actually monitoring, looking for flaws, looking for wrongdoings, and then the agencies can take action, right? You can investigate. So I could totally argue for making it available, and then for citizens to also check. The same thing with forest reserve. If I have just another few more seconds to talk about this, forest reserve areas, like I don't think anybody in the country can have an updated, like really updated, real-time, accurate map of forest reserves. I think nobody has, because it's everything is not, it seems so not aligned. Why not just make the forest reserve maps available? And then, so if I'm a citizen, I see some people doing logging here on this forest, I have two questions. Is this a forest reserve? Second, is this legal or illegal logging? And I always get questions from citizens asking me, hey, if I see logging, how do I report? Can I report? But they don't even know whether it's legal or illegal. So then if you make the forest reserve map available, you have like, what, 30 million people helping you check? That's a lot of man-force, isn't it? A lot of workforce to help you check. So
that's a very, very good point of a way of looking at how to actually send it. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm gonna we'll come back to you in a short while. I'm gonna go back, go into our next panelist, who can continue from where Lau actually left on, because a lot of this actually involves legislation. Our next panelist is Mr. Q G Yao. He serves on the Bar Council Environment and Climate Change Committee, which advises the Bar in matters relating to the environment and climate change. He focuses on enhancing public participation, climate litigation, and environmental justice. Now, Q is also the co-chair of the Malaysian CSO SDG Alliance, a network of civil society organizations that work on issues related to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Welcome on board, Q. I just want to put an opening question to you. Probably you could touch it in your slides, or you're not using a slides as well. But you know, according to the DOE, there were a total of, in the year 2022, for the first 6 months, there were a total of 4,111 pollution complaints that were received by the DOE, out of which now 80% of these complaints were regarding air pollution and open burning. Now, this complaint, of course, does not include the various environmental disasters that we are facing, the loggings, the river pollutions, the reclamation projects, the floods, the landslides, and all, whatever you name it, that we are actually facing in regards to the crisis of environment that we are in. But, you know, the current government has actually promised a lot of reforms. If you pick up from the statements and from their press releases, a lot of reforms into the environmental area. For example, they promised reforms into the Environmental Quality Act to increase the penalty. They have said they're going to come out with a national climate change policy. They've promised amendments to the Water Service Industrial Act. They've talked about wanting to formulate a national level energy policy and many other things. But the question here is, where are we actually right now, Q, you know, when we talk about this? And what is the real problem here actually? Are we talking about lack of legislation? Are we saying that the government is profit-oriented? Or are we saying that, you know, there is lack of public awareness, where the access to information is also, you know, not available publicly, whistleblower protection is not there, and therefore all this actually plays a climate to actually worsen the situation. What's your view on this, Q? And off to you right now.
Thank you, Stanley. I'm delighted to join this amazing panel of speakers, this very important discussion. So thanks for having me. I think these are really pertinent questions you've asked, Stanley, and also about the urgent reforms that we need. And then the question is, against the backdrop of these reforms, do we have the rest of the mechanism that's going to carry through and get us to all these nice places that we aspire to? And there are a lot of questions around here, and there are elephants in the room about our commitment to the rule of law, for example, where we still prefer very much to follow the rule of men. So that kind of cultural backdrop, then what's the use of these kinds of reform that we are pushing for? So I'd like to speak about around two themes. One is on environmental justice, and then after that, I will move in to talk about some of the gaps in environmental governance. I have a bad cough, so please, I apologize beforehand for any uncontrolled bursts of coughing or strange noises coming from me. So please bear with me. So climate change is a challenge that will require all of society to tackle. In fighting climate change, it is also a struggle between different interests. So you have people who want to develop their assets, their property, their lands, and then you have people who stand to suffer and be affected by these kinds of activities, either in the short term or in the long term. So as a society, the right to information is essential to ensure that we are able to fight climate change as effectively and as efficiently as possible. And two, the right to information is also important to ensure that in figuring out the compromises that we as a nation must make, we do our best in upholding environmental justice, right? We must approach climate change with the environmental justice perspective. So what I mean by environmental justice is about this notion of environmental justice is about the fair and equitable distribution of environmental benefits and environmental burdens across society, right? It means that when you enjoy and you can enjoy a privilege or the right to do something, you must ensure that the burden that comes together with it, the impacts that come with it across time would be shared equally, right? That the good things that come from it and the harms that come from it, we should distribute it in a fair way, right? This is not happening, right? We see a very disproportionate enjoyment of environmental benefits by those in power, those who are well connected, and we see a hugely disproportionate amount of poor, the disenfranchised, the marginalized suffer from the consequences of so-called development. So unsustainable development in that sense, when we are not doing this balance right. So environmental justice is the intersection of environmental protection and human rights, both of which are crucial for human dignity and well-being. So an example of unfair and unequitable distribution would be in the Sungai Kim Kim case, for instance, right? Where in 2019, chemical waste that has been dumped into the river Sungai Kim Kim caused around 6,000 people to seek medical treatment after inhaling toxic fumes from the river. 110 schools in the Pasir Gudang district were shut for 2 weeks at least. And it wasn't just one instance, it happened again a few months later with students reporting breathing difficulties and falling sick, right? And it took some time to figure out what was going on, what was the cause, and to figure out what was the state of our river, Sungai Kim Kim, in that situation. So the practice of businesses dumping their waste into the river to reduce their cost of production has led to local communities who are living, working, or studying nearby to pay for the pollution with their health and their lives, and placing the burden on the government to clean it up. And we should remember that Sungai Kim Kim was not even the most polluted river in the Pasir Gudang industrial area. There are a lot more rivers that were actually more toxic than that river. So it is a serious injustice that the cost of doing business has been externalized to the local community and government. But you note how I have framed the Sungai Kim Kim problem as businesses wanting to cut corners and costs. But asking better questions help us improve our framing of the problems. Why don't businesses dispose of toxic waste as required by law? Are the costs of compliance so high that they rather take the risk of prosecution? Are the chances of actually being prosecuted so low that dumping it into the river is a feasible option? And why are the costs of compliance so high? Why is it so onerous that they would take this risk? Is our waste management system broken, right? So as we pursue these questions, depending on what we ask, we shine light on areas of the system that can be improved. And we can focus it on the different institutions that have a role in this. And that's the kind of systemic thinking that's really important. That's where the work of journalists like Makaranga are so important. The contention of what amounts to a fair and equitable distribution of environmental benefits and environmental burdens goes to the heart of what sustainable development means, right? As such, the Sustainable Development Goal number 16 is about how citizens or groups within a society can contend with other constituents of society on the debate of what is fair and equitable. So in that sense, it's when we are able, when the system allows us to come forward to contend with each other on what is a fair and equitable distribution of these benefits and burdens, then we get to a point where of what we can reasonably say, oh, we are on the direction of getting practicing sustainable development. So in that sense, this debunks the myth that the SDGs is a foreign idea and it is where, you know, to meet the SDG goals is to actually comply with a foreign concept or way of life. That is not true at all. The SDGs are mainly a framework, and we have to actually weave it into our own local context to give what it means to us, what it is to be sustainable, location to location, community to community. So now, this is inextricably linked with the question of how can we have better governance in order to achieve the better life, right? Every healthy and robust democracy must represent this invitation to struggle. You know, it is crucial for contenders from all walks of life to come forward to contribute to the meaning of the better life, and they should be able to come forward to contribute. So if we are to be able to do our best at fighting climate change, at achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, then we will need some really basic things. We need non-discriminatory agencies. There's a lot of discrimination, systemic discrimination happening at our agencies. We will need just and independent institutions like the MACC. We will need free and meaningful access to information. And very importantly, we will need a culture where the rule of law is consistently upheld. And where it isn't, then of course, fear dominates. So it's worthwhile to recall Principle 10 of the 1992 Rio Declaration, right? Allow me to just read it. So the environmental issues are best handled with the participation of all concerned citizens at the relevant level. At the national level, each individual shall have appropriate access to information concerning the environment that is held by public authorities, including information on hazardous materials and activities in their communities, and the opportunity to participate in decision-making processes. States shall facilitate and encourage public awareness and participation by making information widely available. Effective access to judicial and administrative proceedings, including redress and remedy, shall be provided. So Principle 10 here sets out three fundamental rights as key pillars of sound environmental governance. First is access to information. Second, access to public participation. You must be free to participate. You must be free to organize yourselves and to participate as a group. And thirdly is access to courts. So against all this, let's have a quick look at the gaps in our legal framework. And we'll start with the federal constitution, right? The gap here is the absence of an express recognition of the fundamental right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. Now, encouragingly, this gap has been shrinking, right? With our chief justices in the past few years consistently emphasizing that Article 5.1 of the Constitution that protects our right to life, this must necessarily encompass our right to the conditions necessary for life, i.e. Clean air, clean water, and earth that is capable of producing nutritious produce, and so on. Now, drawing this gap even smaller now is the declaration of the United Nations General Assembly last month, recognizing the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as a human right. So what this does is it elevates the right to where it belongs. It is a universal recognition of where our priorities should be. So what it means then is your local council, when it makes a decision on whether to develop a green lung in your neighborhood, is no longer a discretionary thing for them to think about the right to a clean and healthy environment, but it is actually, they are now duty bound because it is a human right. Yeah, and so this elevation as a human right is actually quite profound. And so the duty of care now is raised. The duty is raised on governments, and I think on businesses as well. Yeah, both these groups will have these new duties when making decisions and when carrying out their operations. So next is the Environmental Quality Act 1974, which is our main legislation to control pollution. So I say it's to control pollution, it's not to protect our environment. because that's the paradigm in which the EQA was drafted upon. So what we really need now is a big reform on this piece of legislation to reflect a paradigm shift where instead of a reactive legislation to pollution, of controlling levels of pollution, we need an act that reflects that the right to a clean and healthy environment is really crucial for well-being, for dignity, and also to sustainably protect and conserve it for future generations. And so these things are really missing from our existing legislation. So the fundamental principles of the precautionary principle, polluter pays principle is there. Of course, the problems in implementation. So efforts are underway to reform it, and we really have to ensure that the new legislation if it's not a new legislation that takes over the EQA, a reform of the EQA must include mechanisms for access to information and for meaningful public participation. Now, the other piece of legislation that is sorely needed now is obviously the climate change law for Malaysia. In this sense, we are still faffing about, and we're still a long ways away from developing a climate change law legislation and its policies, relevant policies. And this is particularly important and urgent for us as where our economy is so dependent on fossil fuel, and how do we then equitably transition and decarbonize our economy? So these are really important questions, because the countries will have to make drastic decisions and allocate substantial funding towards climate action. So not only do we need a robust climate change law, we also need just and independent institutions, because with the same culture that we have now, mega projects climate action involve mega projects, and mega projects are the dream of anyone who thrives in a country that is obfuscated with the lack of access to information and the lack of participation. So this is so much is at stake. So last but not least is to make significant improvements in access to justice. And the civil justice system has been severely underutilized for the purpose of upholding environmental justice. So you see, every time, like in the Sungai Kim Kim example I spoke about, we rely on a criminal justice system, and that's we count on the government to investigate and then to prosecute, and then to bring them. So that's on the criminal justice system, but the criminal justice system only does one part of it. The civil justice system does something else. All right. So in the criminal justice system, this is an action by the state, and it is and it is to mete out punishments and fines. And so these are not towards these are generally not aimed towards restoration or compensation. Now, in the EQA, there are some provisions for fines and some order for damages for restoration. But as far as I know, that has never been done. And so DOE has just never had the resources to even go into that. They don't even have resources to investigate sufficiently for prosecution. So Stanley, earlier on, you started with some statistics. I think in the recent DOE annual reports, the trend of criminal offenses relating to the environment being compounded instead of going to trial in court is exponential. It's shot up drastically. So it seems to reflect that cases of pollution have increased tremendously, and the capacity to respond to incidents of pollution have not, so capacity is not able to cope with it. And so the response is to compound. But what compounding does is, under the EQA, a compound cannot exceed 2,000 ringgit. And that means all these polluters get the chance to get out of jail in fact, avoid court altogether with a meager payment of 2,000 ringgit. And so from a business compliance, from a governance angle, managers can pay off these environmental boo-boos with a little fine of 2,000. And if the corporate governance isn't strong, they could park it under some kind of fund of expense, and the directors won't even know, and the shareholders won't even know. And so corporate behavior won't change. And so you see where I'm going with this. So that's a terrible and very, very disturbing trend. So
thanks, you.
I'll stop here, and then we'll talk about in the Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Q. I'll come back to you because you raised quite a few important points as well. And I think a lot of this also involves the state, right? Because you can pass a law at the federal level, but a lot of like land matters, forestry, and all this falls under the state jurisdiction. I'm going to ask you a question later on and come back to you.
Okay.
As well.
Yes.
So I would like to call upon our next panelist, Wachla Naidu, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Independent Journalism, CIJ, an organization that focuses on freedom of expression, promoting media freedom, digital rights, and right to information. She has over 20 years of experience in the human rights field, having worked globally and nationally with UN agencies and other human rights NGOs in the country as well. Just prior to joining the CIA, she headed the complaints unit at the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, which requires managing effective resolution of human rights and environmental disputes related to the palm oil industry. Thank you so much, Wachla, for joining us here today. Probably, I hope in your presentation, you will be able to actually cover the bigger framework of the right to information. I know that CIJ has been doing a lot of work in this area, and I know that you were also part of the consultation processes since the time of PH, and now even in the PN as well, you're in the different committees. Could you touch also if you're making any sort of progress into actually legislating an RTI law, and whether we will actually see the light at the end of the tunnel, and the bigger framework of RTI when we talk about how does it contribute to governance and anti-corruption, and its role in actually trying to empower citizens to participate in environmental governance issues. Over to you, Lasha.
Thank you very much, Stanley. I'm just going to share screen from my end. Just give me a moment. So I'm basically going to move the discussion forward from Lau and Q, who had looked at the nexus between environmental justice, climate crisis, environmental reporting, and towards the need for greater access to information, and locate my presentation now on a general overview on the information ecosystem within Malaysia and the related gaps, basically, and barriers to the information ecosystem, and what needs to really change in moving forward our advocacy towards greater and more impactful information justice here in Malaysia. Yeah, if we, we all, I think, would agree that, here in Malaysia, we are often shrouded within the culture of secrecy and retaliation when it comes to access to information, our right to information. Often these threats and barriers are seen within the context of legal threats. We have a whole orbit of legislations or laws which basically criminalizes speech and expression. Even we know that's the Official Secrets Act, which allows for authorities to classify documents as confidential or restricted without necessarily going through a harms test, or not even providing specific timeline for declassification of documents, confidential documents. And in fact, one of the really problematic clauses within the Official Secrets Act is the fact that it offers the court's jurisdiction in terms of declassifying documents. We also have Section 203 of the Penal Code, which basically criminalizes actions of those in the civil service who disclose information obtained in the course of their work and powers without prior and explicit consent from their superiors, often the ministry, and make them liable to either a fine of 1 million or even imprisonment up to 1 year. We have other laws, including Section 233 of the Communications and Multimedia Act, Section 114A of the Evidence Act, Sedition Act, Printing Presses and Publications Act, Section 499 of the Penal Code on criminal defamation, as well as the Defamation Act, which all acts as means of curtailing publication, curtailing disclosure of information, and also seriously also impacts the work of journalists who need to report on very serious matters, including matters of public interest. These laws are then instrumentalized and used as tools to harass, threaten, or also conduct investigations against journalists, human rights defenders, as well as whistleblowers. And increasingly, we also see how even businesses, especially in the context of environmental issues, around agriculture, mining industry, land, forest, deforestation and all, use strategic litigation against public participation. Letters of demands are sent to either media, as well as human rights defenders or organizations working on these issues. Defamation suits are filed against these actors, which then creates another environment that continues to harass and intimidate those who want to disclose and reveal information. As we've heard, we don't have a right to information, a legislation which would protect our right to access information. But on the other hand, we do have freedom of information enactments in Penang and Selangor states. However, there continues to be barriers to access in terms of the types of information that could be obtained through these state level enactments. It's quite limited. Access is also limited because of lack of knowledge. Most people don't know that they are able to access these mechanisms. But cost is also a huge barrier because it could be exorbitant. In Selangor, for example, it's still minimal, it's 12 ringgit. But if we go to Penang, it's 50 ringgit. And for each year of information that we need, it's an additional 50 ringgit. And this is not even to get, paying these amounts, it does not actually guarantee us access to the information that's been requested. Clearly, of course, when it comes to reporting on issues around climate crisis and environment, there is a limited protection for media, especially when media come under threat or media come under investigation. So all of these basically contribute to an environment where information is limited. At the same time, the need for balanced reporting and balanced and accurate reporting is also impacted. This then leads to what Q also mentioned with regards to participation. We look at how the limitations in accessing information, which is meant to facilitate public informing opinions that affect us, which is meant to promote constructive participation in these spaces, are also affected. And then it impacts transparency and participatory democracy. And it really impacts how we look at the need for information to eradicate corruption and hold the government and its bodies accountable to their actions and decisions which affect the general public. So in this context, we really need to look at what needs to give, what really needs to change. And one of the biggest things is the disharmony between how Malaysia looks at its international obligations and how that translates into national action. Also the disharmony between the various forms of national action here in Malaysia. What we need to move forward would be towards a culture of transparency and accountability. if we look at Malaysia, as being part of the United Nations, it's committed to looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, but there is still very little or very minimal action with regards to how the government plans to oppose SDG Goal 1610 on facilitating greater access to information. We are still waiting, actually, for the government's plan of action on the UN General Guiding Principle on Business and Human Rights. Malaysia has ratified CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. However, both times that are reported in 2006 and 2018, the committee, or the treaty body reviewing the state report, had repeatedly asked for disaggregated data on the basis of gender and affected communities, and often the state has failed to produce this data. Yeah. The other interesting thing is, over the course of the last decade, Malaysia has started introducing open government data initiatives. We've got Mampu, we've got the Department of Statistics, we even have the Communications and Multimedia Ministry coming up with different programs. There's a Dasar Perkongsian Data, Swasta, and so on that's being introduced. But it really doesn't translate often into any kind of alignment, how data is being shared between the ministries, how data is being made public, and how public can actually access it, without the barriers that we've been discussing so far this morning. Then we look at the need for political commitments. We make statements at international level, we introduce certain initiatives, but the political commitment actually varies. Stanley had asked us if there are any move towards a legislation. But if we look at what was promised by the PH government, which was to enact a right to information legislation, which will also then be conditioned on repealing the Official Secrets Act, that was moving quite progressively, I would say. However, with the changes in government, and since then we've had 2 new ministers of laws, and while there is still commitment towards enacting a new legislation, there is now the breaking of promise, I'll call, where they say this new legislation would still need to coexist with the Official Secrets Act. So in that context, what we are doing is we've been able to continue to work with the Legal Affairs Division, which is Bahagian Hal Ehwal Undang-Undang, under the Prime Minister's department, which falls within the purview of the Minister of Law, who've been actually, I say, having a lot of consultations, generating a lot of research and knowledge on looking at what needs to happen, what needs to change, and what elements needs to be considered in pushing for a right to information legislation. Just 2 days ago, we were informed by the Legal Affairs Division of BAYU that they will be presenting a paper to the Jawatan Khas Cabinet on anti-rasuah, or JAKMA as they call it. And they will be presenting their rationale and recommendation in moving towards right to information legislation. Our call, however, has been that, when we talk about right to information, it really has to be substantive, and it has to meet the needs and the changing environment around information ecosystem here in Malaysia. And it has to really focus on fundamental principles. And some of these principles include there has to be a duty to publish and has to be proactive disclosure. And Lau had pointed out, it's so difficult to get these information, right? And this needs to be reversed, where information needs to be disclosed proactively, and it has to be maximum disclosure rather than us having to go and figure out where can we get this information and how can we get this information, and can we even get this information, right? The other thing that we are really pushing for is to make sure that any kind of exemption to our right to information is narrow and very clearly defined, and they need to apply a harm test. So any restriction of withholding of information or non-disclosure of information must clearly show that there is actually harm and it impacts public interest. Yeah, the problem and the challenges we have with the Official Secrets Act is it is very broad, right? And there is no clear instruction, I would say, or guidance in terms of how information is being, classified as confidential. The other critical thing is, of course, the issue of ease of access. And ease of access is really not just about cost, but it's also how you're getting the information. Lau had also shared earlier how, sometimes it's even difficult to have copies, digital copies of information. There are many instances where media friends have said that they've had information, shared, but, they've had to sit and start taking handwritten notes because, you're not able to take either photographs or even have access to soft copies of it. And most critically, there has to be an oversight body, and the powers of the oversight body must also be clearly, defined within the right to information legislation. Yeah. That's our push for RTI legislation. But at the same time, given the challenges that different actors face, there has to be more effective protection for media and whistleblowers. Definitely the Whistleblower Protection Act has to be strengthened, reviewed, strengthened. Yeah. The laws which criminalize speech and on defamation needs to either be repealed or amended. And for in order to strengthen ethical and responsible reporting, we actually also need to really push towards the establishment of the Malaysian Media Council. This gives us, some room to really move towards enabling not just the media, but also the public in being aware of our right to this, to any kind of public information, and use information to draw accountability from it. And unless and until we are able to create this environment or this culture of transparency and accountability, we are going to continue to face, corruption, and corruption often, by the state. One thing that we, in the push towards an RTI legislation, one of the concerns that we have raised with BIU is often the timing. Their plan to present the paper to JAPMA needs to actually be considered in terms of strategic timing. Presenting it now, especially where we are, states ridden again with the corruption around LCS and other corruption scandals that are coming in, may have an impact in terms of how the special cabinet committee views this commitment. So timing is necessary, but the push and the advocacy really needs to continue as well towards an environment or an ecosystem that promotes an effective, proactive RTI regime. On that note, I'll stop now and happy to take questions.
Thanks, Wachla. I'll come back to you as well with a couple of questions after your presentation. Next, I would like to introduce two people from the US who are actually joining us here online today. Tom Devine and Samantha Feinstein. Both of them are from the Government Accountability Project, an important organization that works on whistleblower issues. Tom has formally assisted over 7,000 whistleblowers to defend themselves against retaliation and making real differences on behalf of public interests. A leader in campaigns to pass or defend 34 national or international whistleblower laws over the last 2 decades. He has served as a technical expert for drafting or advocacy of 14 more whistleblower laws or policies in nations ranging from Liberia, Tunisia to Great Britain and Italy. Welcome, Tom, to this session. And Samantha, on the other hand, develops and advances private sector whistleblower rights legislation. She represents the public, private, and international whistleblower kinds and conducts research training of advocacy and public education for the international program. She has over 22 years of experience, including extensive work being done in international law and development of anti-corruption and international access to justice, good governance, human rights, immigration, and humanitarian aid. She is also the vice chair of the board of the UN Convention Against Corruption Collusion. Welcome, Sam, to you as well. Thank you so much to the both of you for joining us today, despite being night already there in the US. But probably I want to start off with a important question on actually an issue that here we actually face, and I hope that both of you could cover it as part of your presentation. But we have had situations here in Malaysia where when people came forward to actually blow the whistle on any environmental crimes or an environmental issue, they end up actually being sued by the corporations or the big businesses. Now in Malaysia, as you would already know, there is no automatic whistleblower protection granted. Now you have to go and lodge a report at the enforcement agencies, and they will see whether you actually qualify and meet those requirements under the Whistleblower Protection Act 2010. Now, if you go and actually expose the issue to the media and so on, you're not going to get protected under the Act. So that's one of the exclusions under the Act. So in such a case where the complainant has actually gone to the media and told the media about the pollution, or complained to the media about what's actually happening in his neighborhood or in his town and so on, he actually fails to get the protection, and therefore he can actually be sued in court. So what are some of the best practices from other countries that probably you could share in regards to a situation like this, where the whistleblower actually could protect himself from such suits with the law in place or without a law in place? Some examples probably from some of the countries that you have advised, and actually what can they actually do to actually prepare for such a backlash happening? Over to you, maybe probably to Samantha first, who will start off, and then to Tom.
Tom, did you want to go first? I think your presentation sort of leads into mine.
Yeah,
so
okay.
If you want to go first, then I'm also happy to go first if you want. But you are on mute. I don't know if you know that. There you go.
Well, with respect to the particular questions, those are the two Achilles heels, the two critical flaws of Malaysia's whistleblower law. By far, globally, the best practices for whistleblower laws is to protect public freedom of expression, and also to protect freedom of expression within the workplace where you're employed. 96% of whistleblowing disclosures are by employees who aren't trying to break ranks. They don't break ranks. They're exercising the freedom to warn, to blowing the whistle to defend the institution where they work. It may be they're communicating information protected by a whistleblower law as part of their professional responsibilities. They're just being honest when they do their jobs. We call that duty speech. And that's overwhelmingly the context for communicating protective information. It also may be that they're exercising the freedom to warn to try and prevent liability, liability against the organization where they work, or even fraud that threatens the organization. PricewaterhouseCoopers and the International Association of Certified Fraud Auditors did surveys of internal whistleblowing at corporations, major corporations that were threatened by fraud against the institution, and found that whistleblowers were responsible for catching and exposing more fraud against the companies where they worked than audit departments, compliance departments, and law enforcement combined. These are folks who should be a resource for the institutions where they work, but as a routine, they're treated as threats. That's where most of the retaliation originates, is from people trying to work within the organizations where they're employed. And Malaysia's law doesn't protect that. So that's 96%. And then the other extreme of it is warning the public, the people who are affected by corruption. Malaysia's law doesn't protect that either. It only protects you if you go to an enforcement agency. And even then, you're not safe. Because if under the Official Secrets Act, it's illegal to communicate that, you can actually go to jail for going to the only audience that's protected under this law. Another global best practice is that we have what Government Accountability Project we nickname anti-gag laws. They're supremacy of law provisions. And it says that in the event of a conflict between the whistleblower law and some other provision, that the whistleblower law prevails. Some other law can't cancel it out. If there's going to be a restriction on freedom of speech, you amend the whistleblower law. But Section 6 of Malaysia's law says you can make a disclosure to an enforcement agency, quote, provided that such disclosure is not specifically prohibited by any written law. For all practical purposes, there is no credible free speech right under the Malaysian Whistleblower Protection Act. And so I just very much agree with the speakers who said we need to make this genuine.
So I guess building on what Tom said, I would say that one of the most important things for whistleblowers who are operating in a country with weak whistleblower laws or weak systems, and I should say, you know, in a sense, the United States is among 19 other countries that don't protect whistleblowers from SLAPP suits. And so this is not an uncommon problem, and you can successfully work with whistleblowers, but the sooner they get legal assistance from a good, qualified whistleblower lawyer who knows how to work with whistleblowers and knows how to protect them, the better. Because if they're still employed and they find some evidence of wrongdoing, at that point, the lawyer, what we sometimes do is even dictate to the whistleblower emails that they should be drafting and thinking ahead about the evidentiary burdens and the things that they're going to have to prove, and how, you know, early on, you can work with the whistleblower in how to utilize the evidence so that you're not violating any laws, so that you're not subject to any potential criminal or civil liability, even just for using the evidence that you need to make the case against the employer. And so helping whistleblowers where to store the evidence, what to do with the evidence, how to prepare the evidence, how to protect you from the evidence. And so I think that if you know, they're working closely with a lawyer, their confidentiality can also be protected in the best way. There's a case study I was wanting to share in Malaysia. There was an employee of Top Glove Corp who took photos of employees who were crowding at the factory. This is the world's, I think, biggest manufacturer of medical grade latex gloves. This is during the pandemic, and it shows that social distancing was not being enforced. And he was afraid of losing his job, so he didn't want to go to management. And so he went to a workers' rights campaigner in Nepal who sent them to the evidence to the company and to the government of Malaysia. Well, that probably was not a very good idea. What did the company do? Exactly, I think what you think the company is going to do, which is going to be take that evidence and then try to find the whistleblower. And so they found on the CCTV footage of him and was able to identify him as the person who took this photo, and he lost his job. He had to pay his own way to go back to Nepal, where he was from. And so, you know, but what happened? You know, what are the public consequences of this are really that thousands, literally thousands of people got COVID at this facility, and a young worker died. And so, you know, he was trying to warn, and the reaction is really to just retaliate and get this person out of the way. And, you know, the types of retaliation tactics that employers use against whistleblowers are really just only limited by the imagination. And if there's any legal loophole, they're going to find it and they're going to weaponize it against the whistleblower. And that's why, of course, having really strong paper rights is certainly a must. But it's not that you can't make a difference through also legal campaigns and getting solidarity for the whistleblower. They have much better protection and can make a difference. But these tactics have to be utilized very thoughtfully and mindfully, and the whistleblower should really know what they're getting into before they make the decision, because there's professional and personal consequences. A lot of whistleblowers will end up, divorced or losing custody of their kids, or the retaliation and the pressure of enduring these slap suits can break them psychologically, and they can lose even their minds and enjoyment of life. And some whistleblowers end up committing suicide. So it's something we really need to take seriously and urgently, because in a pandemic situation or an environmental, contamination situation, there's literally life and death consequences for all of this. So if if you can only think about, yourself, you should still care about whistleblowers, because every person in this world really needs this access to information that they provide. Thank you.
Now, another loophole in Malaysia's whistleblower law is it doesn't have confidentiality standards for it, consistent with global practices. But even if it did, the protected audience is so narrow that another major strategy for folks who live in a country with a weak or non-existent whistleblower law is confidentiality. And there's really a couple ways you can do it. One is through an attorney who will have the benefit of the attorney-client privilege, and who, as a matter of their professional identity, may not be such a target. May be easier to have access for discreet communication of the information when there's no legal rights against protection. The second is by what we cause laundering the truth, and getting the truth out to the public through a civil society organization, or through the media. But when there's no anti-retaliation rights, this means it has to be done in a confidential manner. That's why I put in the chat, our organization with two other whistleblower support groups in the United States put out a survival guide that's based on when you won't survive unless you stay confidential. It's called Caught Between Conscience and Career, Exposing Misconduct Without Exposing Your Identity. And that's in the chat for everyone, the link for it. And it's involves a lot of research on how to minimize the risk when you don't have legal rights.
Actually, if I could just add one small thing, I might just say, C4 is also starting this, whistleblower support program that's modeled after the services we are providing to whistleblowers in the United States for Malaysia. And it's so important to have an organization in the country with the expertise and the support services available to help whistleblowers, to help them protect themselves. So I just want to commend C4 on their starting this work for whistleblowers, and we work very closely with them, and it's really critical that we have strong civil society and resources available for whistleblowers.
Thanks, Sam, for actually bringing them up, because our next, I'll go to our next panelist for today, Arif Hamizan, who is the legal researcher in C4 Center. And he's going to touch about that as well, and in a little bit more about detail, because we have a lot of members of the bar who are joining us here today, and to see how we can actually move this forward and to work together to come up with something conclusive, hopefully in the coming weeks and months. So Arif, he has worked in the major law firm in Kuala Lumpur before as a litigation, and his research area in C4 Center is currently includes political financing, whistleblower protection, and freedom of information. So Arif, before you start, I just want to put in probably a wide question to you in regards to how do you think, citizens or even members of the bar and CSOs could actually come forward to address the situation that you're facing today in regards to the whistleblower protection issue, right? The persecution that is happening, the prosecutions that are going on, and so on. And most of the time, we see that this happens when the expose actually involves big businesses, political leaders, or political parties. And we have seen that most of the time happening to many of different case examples. So what do you think we can actually do here, and what are the possible solutions that we can actually put forward to this?
Thanks, Stanley. Firstly, I think I just want to say that it's quite notable that we're speaking on so many issues. Usually when we talk about whistleblowing or right to information, it's often in silos. And it's really nice to see the overlaps with issues of climate crisis, environmental governance, and things like that, all in one forum. I think that's really important to see how these issues overlap, so we can really progress and put together some change for the future. In answer to your question, ultimately, when it comes to whistleblowing, especially in such a hostile environment like in Malaysia, the problem is that it is a very solitary journey. The whistleblowers take on this responsibility, this burden to expose this wrongdoing, often by themselves. And I think, therefore, the role of CSOs, the role of the media is really to provide as much solidarity and support around any whistleblowers which come forward. Now, obviously, there are efforts which are ongoing with our partners, with the Bar Council and journalists as well. But solidarity in numbers has to be the main theme of this effort. Otherwise, confidence in coming forward to expose corruption, even if you know pivotal information, is going to be very, very difficult. It's going to be very, very difficult for people to even want to consider the option of coming forward when they see what happens to other whistleblowers who are essentially left stranded and to fend for themselves. Something else, another aspect that we have to remember when it comes to whistleblowing in Malaysia is, or even generally globally, is that there is a huge element of asymmetry of power. Often these whistleblowers are speaking up against very powerful institutions, very powerful individuals. And we've seen slap cases in the past year or so where you have, for example, the Chief Commissioner of the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission suing an investigative journalist for defamation and having the support of his deputy directors in this effort. And essentially, therefore, that entire institution. And so really, when it comes to our role, I think something that we've taken a leaf out of the book from Government Accountability Project's efforts and others from around the world is that you need some sort of support for these whistleblowers beyond just the letter of the law. Because the letter of the law can be interpreted in a number of ways which may not be favorable as well to the whistleblower, especially when you have weak legislation like we do in our country. So firstly, I'd like to just talk a little bit about the Whistleblower Protection Act. And Tom and a few others have mentioned some of the weaknesses of this act. Like there are very clear there's very clear proof of how weak the legislation is. Just some statistics. Between 2015 and 2019, the MECC only received 224 protection requests. 224 of the span of 5 years. Compared to, in Korea, in the same span, there were 28,000 disclosures to the Corruption Commission over there. And so there's this huge gap in terms of either knowledge or in terms of how this, to borrow Q's phrase, how this Whistleblower Protection Act is being breathed into with its meaning. What is the purpose of this act? When we look at the protections under Section 7 of the Whistleblower Protection Act, you see that there are three. One, protection against protection of confidential information. Now, this would include the wrongdoing that the whistleblower is disclosing, and it would also include, obviously, their identity and so on and so forth. But when you look at how this information, this confidential information, is being protected. The legislation doesn't outline any sort of guideline for the way that this information is supposed to be kept. In fact, the legislation only states that a person who discloses this information is punishable by a jail sentence or a fine. And so what happens then is not only is this retrospective action, it actually unfairly places the burden of this, as I mentioned earlier, the solitary journey on the whistleblower, because once they have made a disclosure to an enforcement agency, they aren't allowed to speak to anyone else or gain support from anybody else, any media, any NGOs, or even their family members, for fear of being caught under this provision. So actually, it's more of a burden than it is a help. Secondly, you have protection against, immunity against civil and criminal suits for your disclosure. Now, again, because of the stringent requirements of this act, which require a person to disclose information to an enforcement agency only, very few people receive this protection. And that's why we see so many SLAPP suits prevalent in Malaysia. And thirdly, under Section 7, you have the protection against detrimental action. And so detrimental action would include things like harassment, it would include things like demotion or being transferred at your job, it would include causing injury or harm, things like that, not only to yourself, but also to associates, so maybe family members or colleagues who helped you along the way. Now, the idea behind this section, I think this protection is there. However, again, in terms of practice, there's very little being acted upon by the enforcement agencies as a preventative measure. This protection against detrimental action falls under Section 10, where the person who commits the detrimental action is then punished by jail sentence or a fine. But that happens after the fact. And that's something that you also have to prove in court for it to happen. So as Sam mentioned earlier, it's very high stakes. It's a life or death situation. You cannot wait for the harm to have been caused before being protected for the harm. So there's a bit of a contradiction in terms there. Now, not only do we have a weak legal framework, but like beyond that, in terms of practice, in terms of how whistleblowers are being protected under this act, it's very questionable. You see news reports every few months of, or every few weeks even, of whistleblowers' identities being leaked and then being harassed on the street or being attacked as they're going to and from their office or their homes. We've spoken to many environmental activists who, some of them have told us that when they have made a report to the DOE about a certain illegal company's illegal activity, on that day itself, a person from the company will actually go to them and ask them why they made that complaint or something to do with that complaint. Now, how is that so? Is the manner in which this information is being held so weak that it's so easily compromised? So again, there's a gap in the practice in terms of whistleblowing. And then obviously, as we've mentioned many times, SLAPPs are being used as a way to punish people who come forward. So rather than the people who are committing the wrongdoing being investigated, it's the whistleblower themselves. And I think thirdly, and this is similar to the issue that Washlam brought up with regard to right to information enactments, there is a distinct lack of knowledge for whistleblowers on what to do when they have this information. They genuinely do not know what to do because many are not aware of this law, and even if they were aware of the law wouldn't necessarily protect them. But even if we had a good law, many people have nowhere to turn. There is also the issue of a trust deficit with enforcement agencies, not knowing whether you can trust the police to handle your information discreetly, because it might involve higher ups, and then they might get what arahan dari atas, things like that, which compromise their position. And so having said, having sort of outlined this is very, I think, pessimistic view of the state of whistleblower protection in Malaysia. C4 has been looking to identify ways in which we can support whistleblowers, because over the past 10 years, obviously, we've been involved in reform efforts. I've highlighted many areas for legal reform, the legal amendments that we need to make. But while those reforms are being pushed through, what can we do for the whistleblower? So the idea for C4 Center right now is that we're attempting to organize and put together a whistleblower support system. And we've spoken to Government Accountability Project. Sam as well has been of much help in this, to set up an online portal, I think similar to the rainforest one that Yao Hua mentioned earlier, where whistleblowers can submit their information to us, or then perhaps the challenges that they're facing as whistleblowers, to disclose wrongdoing to us, where we can support them either through basic legal advice in terms of who they might want to go to, in terms of whether or not they need to engage with a lawyer, or whether or not a simple report will do. But also to identify certain cases that whistleblowers are involved with, which can be used for strategic litigation, especially in terms of public interest cases, because there are several case laws which currently hang in the air in the Malaysian judicial system, which again place an undue burden on whistleblowers. So, for example, if you look at Section 6 of the Whistleblower Protection Act, all a whistleblower needs to obtain whistleblower protection is reasonable belief that the disclosure happened. That the wrongdoing happened. However, there is a case called Rokia where the judges in the High Court interpreted that section and said that what a whistleblower needs to do to obtain this protection is to be able to justify cogently the wrongdoing itself, which essentially places a very high burden on the whistleblower to identify the evidence that they need to provide to the enforcement agency, and only then do they get the protection. Secondly, higher up in the Court of Appeal, the court in the same case, this Rokia case, established that a whistleblower is not allowed to disclose the wrongdoing to any third party. They can only disclose it to an enforcement agency, or their whistleblower protection will be revoked. So through our whistleblower system, we hope to identify certain whistleblower cases which we are able to support legally through strategic litigation to overturn these cases as well, and to set healthier precedents, stronger precedents for whistleblowers within the court system. And I think I'd like to take this opportunity as well, since we're speaking to members of the bar and other members of society, if there are individuals or organizations who would want to join us in this effort to create a healthier and more supportive system for whistleblowers in Malaysia, then feel free, please do reach out to us. Because I think ultimately when we talk about environmental governance, we talk about anti-corruption measures, it all comes back down to information and evidence. Some information is more dangerous than others, and that's why whistleblowers need this protection desperately. This is why we're having this forum today. And so I think with that, I will pause, and I think we'll discuss more during the Q&A.
Thank you, Arif. Yeah, we'll probably have a few questions for you as well. We're opening up the session for question and answers from our participants online. So please feel free to actually type in your questions into the chat box, and we will take up your questions here. Okay, yeah, probably we can take an in-house question as well. Can someone give him the mic, please? You just take an in-house question from him. Yeah. Okay.
Awesome. Hi, is this okay? Awesome. Firstly, I want to congratulate Stanley
Thank you.
on the birth of his son, right? Yeah, but okay, back to the okay. So earlier, Q mentioned that in climate action, right, the benefits and the the sort of effects of climate change has to be, the burden of climate change has to be shared equally, right? And so we've seen a sort of global, collaboration towards climate action. But recently, I feel like it's been geared towards climate financing, right? And that's extremely important. But at the same time, in a country like Malaysia, where we don't have the legislative infrastructure, or rather like the governance infrastructure, what is the use of money, right? When most of the money would not, there would be leakages, as we've seen recently in Ministry of Defense and elsewhere. So how do we stop the leakages, right? So we've seen the CIJ representative discuss right to information and transparency. But in terms of governance itself, right? How do we make sure the finance meets its objectives? And how do we make sure that it's all part of a comprehensive plan towards climate action?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Q, you want to take the question first, probably?
Sure. Yeah. I think it's hard to battle the cynicism that comes when I think that's a good question. It's a valid one. And to my mind, there are all these things which are really urgent. So climate finance, how do we know that these resources will be put to effective use, will be allocated to where it is necessary, and then who gets to determine how we use these efforts? Current climate with limited access to information and with limited participation. So I think we'll be expecting very ordinary, the usual things to happen. And the other thing is not on the misallocation. The other thing is just inaction, and that's also equally bad. Which is not making necessary changes, not pivoting from where we are. Because where we are right now is an exploitative type of development. And so against this backdrop, with this call to climate action, the kind of rush to grabbing profits from any climate action type activities, like green tech, like carbon trading and offsets. And we can see from the very worrying deal that was signed in the Sabah, how it's just been shrouded in secrecy. And so these kinds of things will become more prevalent. And so again, back to, it's really important to have strong institutions in place to have these checks and balances. So it takes all of society. I think it really needs all of us to be vigilant and active. Yeah, I'll stop here. I'm sure others can say some more.
Yeah. Washla, anything probably on your side? Can't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I think just a very quick. I think we really can't clearly divide climate action from climate financing as well, right? Climate financing, the necessary infrastructure, access, budgets, and so on are really going to be critical in coming up with real climate action that really looks at not just mitigation and adaptation, but a broader action plan. That is really inclusive and that is really centered here. A lack of access to what is already available. It requires additional political will to push for this, and a better legal environment where we can actually claim justice and redress.
Thanks, Farshla. Yeah, Sam. Sorry, Yao, probably you want to add on that.
Yeah. I think with the climate financing, right? I've seen some. For example, I've seen some I would like to see a transparent platform, like a digital platform, where all these projects that have received, climate financing, all listed there, and then all the reports and then the reviews are all available there. Then that will make it easier and more transparent for everyone to just keep track. And then in Malaysia, in the past few years, the federal government has given what we call the ecological fiscal transfer to state governments to conserve their forests. So 60 million given in 2019, and then 70 million allocated or distributed in 2021.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people actually have no idea where the money went to and how it was used.
Exactly.
But in the last parliament sitting, YB Nurul Izzah actually posed the question, and then on where this money was allocated, and then so I would encourage everyone to go to the Parliament Hansard records to look at the response. It suffices to say that it is quite interesting. Some states with very few forests actually got quite a bit of the ecological fiscal transfer, and the changes were quite volatile, I would say, between those 2 years. So I think it's quite interesting. I'll put it at that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Coming back to the whistleblower question, I think there's a question online by Louis Wenbel. Oops. Okay. Yeah. So the question is, from what GAP panelists pointed out, don't you think that whistleblowers must first be directed to a professional person who briefs him on the consequences before he comes forward? Then he may be directed to maybe a center like C4 to be guided on how to discuss his information so as to protect him. It is a long road he has to travel, and whether he has that commitment.
The question is, absolutely right. When someone comes to Government Accountability Project and they're considering blowing the whistle, our first duty is to try and talk them out of it. And we let them know it's not because we want to succeed or avoid working with them, but they have the right to make a fully informed decision. This is one of the highest stakes crossroads of at least their professional life and maybe their lives. And they have the right to know what they're getting into. The second reason is, for an informed decision, is they can't quit in the middle. If they blow the whistle, they need to know what they're getting into and be prepared to finish what they've started. If you quit in the middle, it would have been better to remain silent, because the abuse of power and corruption that you're challenging will be stronger, having withstood the threat, and you'll never be forgiven. The effort will be to destroy you for even starting to challenge it. So yes, it's essential, both as a matter of justice to the whistleblower and for the objectives they're trying to obtain.
And I think the GAP and C4 model, makes it sort of this one-stop shop. You don't have to go, to multiple places. C4 like GAP would be able to advise you of the consequences, so that people can make the best, decision for themselves, and also to be able to receive, assistance with making their disclosures and receiving protection. And it's important to make it as easy as possible, I think, for whistleblowers to get support, because it's going to be a long road if they decide to proceed, like you said.
Yeah, that's right. That's why we're actually here also, right, Arif, actually to engage with the lawyers and to see how they can actually complement the support system, so that this client and lawyer privilege actually can be applied in that process and so on, right?
Yeah, I think just to add, C4 regularly receives complaints or disclosures of wrongdoing from either anonymous sources or people looking for help. And often the best thing that we can do is really just outline what the situation is for them and what they might be facing in the future if they do proceed to expose the information either publicly or going to an enforcement agency. But there have been so many instances where we've had to restrain ourselves or sort of decline continued effort with specific whistleblowers purely because the resources needed to take even a single whistleblower along this entire journey to support them along that path are incredibly high. You could expect lawsuits, you could expect all manner of harassment and confusion and also having to deal with the publicity of it all if it breaks the media. It's a very traumatic experience potentially. Some of the whistleblower organizations that we spoke to as well often speak of how, our CSO partners here often speak of how whistleblowers who come to their organizations talk about the mental aspect, the mental expenditure and pressures that they face, which are not covered by legislation, are not provided by any organization within the country. And so hopefully this effort is really, right now we're in the process of trying to collate this data, these experiences and also the expertise from other organizations, so that we can really hit the ground running once we are able to accept and receive disclosures or requests for support.
Yeah. Well, actually, I just like to ask you a question in terms of public awareness in the campaigns that you run. How hard or how has it been for you? Is it an easy road to actually educate the public on why we actually need an FOI legislation, on RTI legislation, and you know how they could actually use it into their advantage to actually participate in governance and so on? How has it been? Because I think the same question is also for the whistleblower law themselves. How many people do actually knows that actually we have a whistleblower protection mechanism in place? Yeah, Varshila.
It's a really interesting question, Stanley, because if we look at the different campaigns that we've been carrying out, even C4 was involved in the early campaigns, right? Know Your Right campaigns, Know My Right campaigns, and things like that. I think the challenge is people are so used, especially within the current information climate, right? Getting information through WhatsApp, your Facebook. They are already so indoctrined to see how they perceive information, which could be misinformation, disinformation, that the value and the trust in publicly held information is actually very critical at the moment. Because if you don't have state agencies who are proactively disclosing information, the trust deficit, as Arif said earlier as well, would continue, right? And because of this whole thing about we are not able to trust the government's information, we are not able to trust the agencies, we're not able to trust the public, the public servants, that it creates an element that people are not even willing to come forth to demand for greater access to information. Yeah. So it's not just lack of awareness, it's really the environment in itself that contributes to this lack of environment, right? And then we talk about the trust deficit is not just amongst the public, it's actually also amongst those in the civil service. While at one point we have all these, queries that we are asked every time we talk to either, a local government or state agencies, like, why do you want to create more work for us? Why do you want to create more challenges for us? We have the legal threats of, 203A hanging over our head. But now you're creating a situation that we need to compile all this information. We need to make sure that this information is available. But the reality is they have the information. It is about requiring a necessary legislation followed by a mechanism to make these information available. So, but we saw a switch, I think, when it came to the pandemic, right? During COVID, there was increasing demand for information. People wanted to know about vaccine. There were even questions on procurement. People wanted to understand what is the rollout mechanism. It even started on basic things about statistics. So there is now a growing, I would say, climate where people are aware that they need this information. And of course, it started with public health crisis, but it's moving towards understanding the need for information that affects us on a day-to-day life. It's a long road for us, so it's not just the public, it's the state. It would be the duty holders and the duty bearers who need continued education for us to move towards a better regime.
Thanks, Varshra. We have a question online, but I think I need to rephrase it. It's from Natali. The president of Sahabat Alam has said that environmental agencies' opinion during the EIA process often get disregarded. How can these agencies ensure their opinion hold more weight without perhaps violating laws? I mean, we all know for a fact that the EIA reports that come out, right, even though the agencies would give something negative or say that something is about, the project affects the environment in a particular way, but in a couple of months, we see the project being carried out anyway. It still goes on, right? Yeah. So then what is the real purpose of the EIA then? Why do we even have the EIA process? Do we actually need to look into reforms into the EIA process?
Oh, I think reforms are being worked on by various parties and also by the Department of Environment itself with legal advisors. They're looking at the whole EIA guidelines and the whole EQA in itself. But as to answering the question of so there are two questions there. I guess one is what's the purpose of the EIA? Well, the purpose is to inform. The purpose of the EIA report is to help all the stakeholders involved, including the developers and the state agencies and the authority, the decision makers, to identify the potential environmental impact arising from a project, and then what are the ways that we can mitigate, and best prevent, but mostly mitigate the impact, and that's it. And so so the report is the report, and then after that, whether it is the recommendations in the mitigation measures in the report, whether they are implemented, that is up to the enforcement agency to make sure. So that's that. The decision, depending on whether it's a Schedule 1, on the state level or on the federal level EIA report, if it's on the state level, then the state director of the DOE decides whether they approve or reject the report. If it's federal, then of course it's the DG of the DOE. And yes, I have seen state agencies, in their review of an EIA report. Actually, very often state agencies do quite a very good job at reviewing the EIA report and then say, this should be done, there was this flaw in the EIA report. And then the consultant would have to come back with their responses, right? And yeah, and it's eventually it's up to the DG, if it's at the federal level, to decide whether they are happy with the EIA report and whether they are convinced that the developer has the capacity, I think, and also the intention to carry out all these recommendations. I think this question is better posed to the DG of DOE. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. We are actually already at 11:20. We're supposed to finish at 11:30, but I'm going to give probably all the speakers 1 minute each for your closing statements. You can answer the question if you want to that I've posed earlier. But also probably also how to look forward from here on, where there could be possible avenues to actually work with the bar and potential lawyers actually to form something to actually look forward how we can actually address some of the issues that we have actually discussed here today, and to address it at a different level and so on. So probably I'll start with Q.
So yeah, I think just in closing, I look forward to more of these partnerships and this cross-pollination of ideas between folks working on the environment and folks working on anti-corruption and folks specifically working on protecting whistleblowers. I think we need all these partnerships to come together, especially in a space where leadership is lacking. So yes, I'm very encouraged by what I've learned in this forum. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Q. Probably with Yao. Yeah.
I would like to looking forward. I actually see a lot more data being used by journalists in Malaysia. And I think with that, I think the readership, the citizens should get more accustomed to seeing this data and then realizing that, having all this data will actually help us all get better informed and, really get to the roots of any of the environmental issues. But going forward, I would like to really encourage all our media friends, newsrooms, to work together even more to actually to get the data that we need. I think, yeah, just work together more, and I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Lau. Varshla?
Yeah, I would actually have like a couple of things I'd just like to raise in terms of perhaps support and engagement with the lawyers in the virtual room. I think one key area is to look at how the lawyers could form part of the different networks to challenge, to initiate strategic litigation, I'll say, as well as challenge some of these laws which criminalizes expression and speech. That's really critical. I think we need to keep filing more and more of these challenges. Second thing is we're working with some media groups and other civil society organizations in forming a media lawyers network. And we are really going to require a lot of support from lawyers. Again, not just to provide the necessary support when media come under attack, but also again to do more proactive review of laws and present our recommendations to the various state agencies on this. Yep. So there are a lot of possibilities, and we're really looking forward to the continued engagement. Thank you, Stanley.
Thanks, Varshla. Arif, probably.
Thanks. Yeah, I've really enjoyed listening to everyone else's presentations today. I think really to the lawyers in the room, one thing to share would be often when I think when I first started working with C4, we often talk about legal reform as an abstract concept where you're talking about the intricacies of the language and things like that and the effects and the consequences. But the people who come to C4 looking for help are there very sincerely, very earnestly. They're purely by themselves because they want to help the country, or they want to help their organization, or the people around them. They see something which is being done wrong, an offense being done, and they think it's not right, and then they're looking for help. And right now there are very few avenues for this help. So I would really encourage anyone with any sort of expertise to start to look at working on the ground as well, and engaging directly with people such as this who would be I would say grateful for that support. I think really that's it has to be two-pronged. We have to go at the top with the law, but also right now there are people who are struggling, and we really need to support those as well.
Yeah, thanks, Arif. Thanks, Arif. That's a very great point as well. Sam, probably Tom and Sam. Yeah.
You want to go first, Sam?
Tom first.
Okay. I'm glad to go first. Thank you so much for honoring us to participate, and I couldn't be more impressed with our fellow panelists tonight. It's an honor to be on the team with them. The four cornerstones that I would suggest to take out from this discussion is, first, to know that having effective legal rights is a marathon process. It's an exercise in stamina. Almost every country, the first law which establishes the principle of freedom of speech is very weak in practice. We've had the same experience in the United States, where reasonable belief meant absolute proof, according to a court decision. And we're now in our fourth generation of the U.S. Whistleblower Protection Act, and I'm working hard to get the fifth. It's a never-ending process. The second is the strategy that turns information into power is consequences. If location is the magic word in real estate for whistleblowers and the power of the truth, it's consequences. How is their knowledge, how is their disclosure, what they're exposing, going to affect people's lives? The third is turning that powerful information into solidarity through partnerships, when there's not a strong whistleblower law, through partnerships with CSOs in the media, based on confidential communications, secure communications, because it's not protected activity, and through lawyers often who can communicate information on behalf of anonymous clients. And finally, the fact that Malaysia has a weak whistleblower law is not stopping any institutions, and particularly the private sector corporations, from voluntarily setting up their own whistleblower policies to have enlightened self-interest. Kind of put an exclamation point on it. Studies by Professor Kaya Welch of George Washington University found that corporations which have internal whistleblower channels have fewer lawsuits filed against them, more modest results in terms of liability from those lawsuits, fewer government enforcement actions, and weaker government penalties. Whistleblowing is an investment in any organization that chooses to listen to the messenger instead of killing him.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah.
So I just also want to first thank you, Stanley, for moderating today, and the co-panelists. I've really enjoyed listening to you and learning from you in these discussions. I want to thank CIFOR and the bar. I think I'll just maybe add that I wanted to make you aware of the Whistleblowing International Network, which is an international resource of support for different organizations who are helping whistleblowers around the world. And I would definitely encourage everyone to join Whistleblowing International Network, and to offer that GAP is a resource, for anyone whoever needs it, support on legislative advocacy, whistleblower cases, trainings, whatever support you need, please consider us on call. And the work that we've done to team up with bar associations, is invaluable. The bars really play a very, very important role in providing standards and services, and the same with the advocacy and being a watchdog. And so the last thing I want to say is I want to make a plug that if you have Netflix, I encourage everyone to watch Meltdown. And it's about a nuclear safety whistleblower, Rick Parks, that GAP represented on the nuclear meltdown of 3 Mile Island. That almost took out everyone from New York down to Washington, D.C. And there's some great footage of Tom in the 80s as a young lawyer, which is one of the many wonderful reasons to watch it if you have the ability to get Netflix. I hope you'll watch it and enjoy it. It really, I think, hits a lot of the points that we've talked about today with environmental whistleblowers and retaliation and the risks that they face, and what a lawyer and a whistleblower go through together in order to make a difference in a very difficult context, and the life or death consequences of it.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Samantha. I'm definitely watching the movie to also see Tom in there as well. But thank you to the both of you for actually coming and trying to actually give us some ideas, and we will definitely actually contact you after this, after we try to find a way that we can actually push forward our support system here at CIFOR and so on. But we will definitely keep you in the loop, and to see how we can both collaborate each other and in what areas and so on. Thanks to also all the panelists who are with us. Thank you so much to Q, Watsla, Yao, and to Arif as well, who are here today. Thank you so much for all the inputs. I think we have really discussed quite a number of issues, and we have seen the both importance of FOI and whistleblowing laws that can actually help to actually address some of the environmental issues that we are actually facing in this country today. So for those of you members of the bar who are online, we will be actually showing up a QR code to you shortly on the screen. So if you have an interest to actually be part in any way towards the support system that we have been actually discussing about, kindly please scan this QR code. So you need to open your QR scanner on your code and scan this, and it will take you into a form, Google form, that you need to fill up to give us your contact, and we will contact you after the program. And basically it's not any commitment, but it's just that you're saying that, hey, probably I want to be part of this and see how I could actually contribute towards it. So you could contribute in any way that you want to, in any expertise area that you probably are in, but just give us your contact, and maybe we'll call for a meeting and so on, and try to discuss to see any possible way that we can actually move forward this with the lawyers. So thank you everyone once again, and I'm handing over back to the MC.
Thank you very much, Stanley, and a big round of applause to our panelists, Watsala, Yao, Q, Arif, Tom, and Sam. Especially Tom and Sam, it's already almost 11:30 at night in US. Thank you for staying with us. And we will actually be taking a short break now. Yeah, we are about 10 minutes behind, but we'll still probably take a 10 minutes because I think everyone probably wants to get a cup of coffee before we start session 2, which with the panel topic on utilizing suspicious transaction report and tip off under AMLA, which is the Anti-Money Laundering Act, for predicate offenses raising from corruption, an alternative. So please stay tuned, come back in 10 minutes, and we will bring you the session 2 panel. Thank you very much. everyone has managed to get a cup of coffee and ready to start our second session on utilizing suspicious transaction report and tip off under AMLA, which is the Anti-Money Laundering Act, for predicate offences rising from corruption as an alternative. So without further delay, I will invite Pushpa Ratnam, member of the Bar Council Committee on AMLA and partner at NICO, to take over the session. Over to you, Pushpa.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to session 2 for the day. Thank you, Siping. I'll start again. And good morning to everyone and welcome to session 2 for the day. We have 3 very honorable speakers with us this morning. Let me introduce the speakers to you. Cynthia Gabriel is somebody that's not unknown. A lot of us know her as a key advocate of human rights, and she is very much into good governance in Malaysia on the global platform. So there's a lot more to say about her. Cynthia was appointed into prestigious Global Future Councils of the World Economic Forum, WEF, on economics and anti-corruption issues for the term 2019 and 2020. She's also on the advisory body to the World Economic Forum. What else can we say about her? A lot more. In 2020, Cynthia received a meritorious award by the King of Malaysia for her outstanding efforts in fighting corruption and courage in advancing democratic freedoms in Malaysia and the region. So it is going to be an absolute pleasure having Cynthia with us and to hear her this morning. Now, the second speaker would be Encik Megat Abdul Munir. Oh, I'm so sorry. He's the third speaker. Yes, I'm so sorry about that. The second speaker we have is Encik Kamal Bahrain bin Omar, and he's the Deputy Director General of the National Anti-Financial Crime Center, shortly known as NFCC. Yeah, and of course, Mr. Kamal is also, he has got a very, very colorful CV. And if I start way back in 1994, he started off as a magistrate in a magistrate's court in Parit Buntang. He's worked in the in the judicial field as a penolong kanan pendaftar. He has been a prosecutor and he has been a peguam kanan persekutuan. He has been the Setiausaha Suruhanjaya Integrity, Timbalan Pengarah for Bahagian Pendakwaan and Perundangan Suruhanjaya Pencegahan Rasuah Putrajaya, Pengarah Pendakwaan Negeri Sarawak. So it goes on and on and on. No? He's just an amazing man, amazing, colorful CV that he has. And again, it's a real pleasure to have Encik Kamal with us today as in his present role as the Deputy Director General. And our third speaker, Honorable Mr. Megat, Encik Megat, his full name being Encik Megat Abdul Munir. He's a founding partner of a firm known as Zain, Megat and Murad. Yeah, this is, I think, a KL-based firm, right, Mr. Murad? Mr. Megat, I'm sorry. Okay, so Encik Megat actually has got corporate and commercial practice experiences. He does notably corporate work, which include advising and negotiating licensing and technology transfer agreements for automobile manufacturers, takeover of public listed companies, whether it's hostile or amicable. He advises on foreign investments, mergers and acquisitions, listing and compliance requirements, as well as queries from Bursa Malaysia and the Securities Commission. So there we go. Very, very, very colorful background of three very honorable speakers. We're going to start this morning with Cynthia. Cynthia is currently the, what is this now? C4, founding director, sorry. The founding director of Center to Combat Corruption and Cronyism. Correct, Cynthia? All right, okay. Bear with me here, just so that I can see a bit more on this issue. Okay, so I believe that this center is to promote open government policies at all government levels and to monitor compliance of the UNCAC, i.e. the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, which Malaysia has ratified in 2008. So with that, Ms. Gabriel, can we, or would you prefer me to call you Cynthia? Cynthia, that's fine. Okay, Cynthia is here to talk to us about the relationship between AMLA and corruption. Cynthia, please tell us.
Thank you very much, Pushpa, somebody who I have long admired in the legal fraternity.
Thank you.
I am very honored to be sitting with very esteemed panelists, but once again, on behalf of C4, I wanted to say a big thank you to the Bar Council for agreeing to collaborate with us on this anti-corruption forum. And we have had many long-standing collaborations before. So now that issues are emerging, new, and in the first session, we had a very interesting one on environmental crimes and how access to information, the right to whistleblow, and so on could actually become a very important topic for the legal fraternity here in Malaysia. So today, I am going to address a couple of things, and I have a few slides just to help us move along. And I have titled the slide, The Incestuous Relationship Between Corruption and Money Laundering. Now, many a time, we often see these as rather separate, but at the same time connected issues that financial crimes are the impetus to where corruption scandals actually take place. And my colleague here, Encik Kamarul, will be readily able to tell you that within the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission itself, there is now an entire unit to deal with money laundering and to recover the proceeds of stolen property, of illegal loot, and to bring back asset recovery. So in all these things that I just spoke about, there is an entire chain of events from how financial crimes take place, how money gets laundered, and how corrupt proceeds actually enable that kind of activity to take place. And much of it actually happens in the dark world of our shadow economy. It doesn't happen above board where you just put there and say, can you just wash some money for me because I need to bank it in and something like that. It doesn't happen like that. And I think that's where the challenge is. It's really how it becomes so difficult to track and so difficult to maneuver. So these are, what happened to moving it forward? So, looking at some high-profile cases that are already in court, that already involve some very well-known personalities, including former politicians, current politicians, businessmen, and so on, and how lawyers become very critical in that entire chain of trying to stop corruption and trying to mitigate the risks of money laundering. And I will leave this part a lot to Encik Megat to deal with the actualities of it, how to report a suspicious transaction, how to actually ensure that the partners in our law firms don't actually engage in suspicious activities and so on and so forth. And finally, to look at also some global movements. Now, we know that investigative journalists have become so critical in uncovering facts. We've had 3 series of papers from Panama to Paradise to Pandora Papers, which have been leaking a lot of details and information on big personalities actually leaking money, actually trying to use offshore islands, trying to use shell companies, trying to use various methods to move money from entity A to entity B to entity C before it actually gets into a bank account. And it becomes more and more complex. And I think this is where we discussed with the Bar Council that the complexity and the illegality of it is what lawyers also need to tackle and need to assist institutions like MACC, institutions like now we have the National Financial Crime Center as an offshoot from our lessons learned from 1MDB, and many other institutions like the judiciary, police, and so on. And there are some mechanisms. I think everybody knows the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, which is the primary global body that looks at recommendations to stop money laundering. But FATF does not work, say, directly on anti-corruption issues. So anti-corruption, there is the UNCAC, as Pushpa already mentioned, the UN Convention Against Corruption. And now I just wanted to introduce one thing in one of my final slides also is another convention which now talks about transnational organized crime. And this is where a lot of the cross-border issues actually start to take place, that it is the criminal syndicates and the networks that start looking at smuggling of natural resources, of logs, actually looking at smuggling of drugs, illicit, what do you call that, cigarettes, counterbrand goods, and so on and so forth. So the topics get very big, but we want to go back to this whole thing about money laundering. And this is where I think we want to look at the relationship with corruption. Okay. The link sometimes is clear. You know, when you have proceeds from bribes and you want to hide it away from the whole illegality of the system. So what do? You try to find ways to move the money around, to wash the money, layer the money, and actually be able to bank it in a way that shows that there's no more illegality, the theft of public goods, the theft of public funds, and they generate significant amounts of proceeds that need to be cleaned in order to enter the financial system. So I'm hoping that my colleagues will also talk about the enforcement of how money enters into the financial system, Bank Negara and all these different things. And countries normally with low levels of compliance for anti-corruption under the CPI index and so on, also normally have a low level of compliance with trying to actually weed out AMLA. Okay. Okay, so this framework now for Malaysia, let's start with Malaysia, is the act itself, which Encik Megat will talk about a lot. And the Act itself actually looks at several things. And one of the things that we actually wanted to, is it too small? Can you all see what it is? Okay, yeah, okay. So the Act itself is something that I need to use. Okay, that it's called the Anti-Money Laundering, Anti-Terrorism Financing and Proceeds of Unlawful Activities 2001. It imposes reporting obligations on institutions as a countermeasure to prevent and mitigate money laundering, and it was enacted with the intention to fulfill international standards by the FATF. So under AMLA, law enforcement agencies, public prosecutors, and courts are given powers to freeze, seize, and confiscate or forfeit proceeds of properties involved in money laundering activities. And we can see that this is sometimes actively used in MACC investigations and cases, freezing of bank accounts, money, and so on and so forth, of many of these individuals. Now, for the next slide, okay, for the next slide, I just wanted to link the work that we do, not so much with AMLA, but it's actually in the second schedule of the AMLA. And some of the offenses here include accepting gratification, which is section 16 of the MACC Act, the offense of giving or accepting gratification by an agent, of intending to deceive a principal by an agent, section 17, section 18, the acceptor or giver of gratification to be guilty, notwithstanding that purpose was not carried out, not in relation to principal affairs of business, section 19, and 21 and 22 talks about bribes, bribery of officer of public body and of public officials, dealing with using, holding, receiving, concealing gratification, and so on, section 26, and offense of using office or position for gratification. Section 23 of the MACC Act is often used in tandem sometimes with similar charges with money laundering. And we have had some ongoing cases of very high profile personalities involved in such things. We have the case of Dato Sri Najib Razak of Lim Guan Eng, all charged under section 23 as well for abuse of power while they were in office. Now, my next slide, and this is about where I'm going to leave it at the AMLA section, because my colleagues will actually follow up on that, is that many of these corruption trials in court now actually use Section 4.1 of the AMLA. And what is that actually? It's about engaging directly in a transaction that involves, acquires, receives, possesses, disguises, transfers, converts, exchanges, and it removes from or brings into Malaysia or conceals, disguises, or impedes the establishment of the true nature and origin. And I'd be actually very curious to know whether this section is actually detailed enough to ensure that the persons actually charged under Section 4 could actually be brought to book. So the proceeds of unlawful activity or instruments of an offense is actually covered under Section 4. Now, the point about rambling on about a law is also to look at conviction. So if they are convicted, they would face an imprisonment term of not more than 15 years, impose a fine of at least 5 times the amount received from the laundered money of 5 million or whichever that is higher. Now, I actually am coming from a more anti-corruption background, and we are rather curious, really, why many of these high-profile corruption cases actually the law enforces, the Attorney General's, and the Attorney General and his office often use AMLA to charge this individual. Many a time they say the MECC Act makes it very difficult to charge persons with corruption because the evidence and the standard of proof is actually much higher than AMLA. And it will be very interesting to actually understand this phenomena a lot more. So in all of these case studies that have been brought to court, and many of this took place because there was a monumental change in government in 2018, and now some of these cases are ongoing, but there have been changes of government the last 2-3 years, so we keep changing governments now very fast, like as if, you know, changing shirts and all that. But this is what it is. The first case of Najib Razak, charged under Section 41B of AMLA for money laundering and receiving RM42 million of proceeds for unlawful activities through real-time electronics transfer and all that. So you can read that. But this is also a case which is currently in court at the federal court. The SRC case is where he's also charged for receiving 42 million into his personal bank account. It is up at the federal court now, and if we are all following a lot of the drama that's taking place currently, we can also try to understand the importance of how AMLA can be enforced. And then we have Rosmah Mansour, who faces 12 charges of money laundering amounting to about 7 million ringgit. And this is in relation to the solar project. And she also faces possibilities of imprisonment of up to 15 years and a fine not less than 5 times of the sum of proceeds of unlawful activities. So it seems like a very interesting way of charging personalities. Then you get Zahid Hamidi. And this trial is also ongoing. He is facing 27 charges of money laundering amounting to 72 million ringgit and engaging in direct transactions involving income from illegal activities, and it gets really interesting when you follow the details of the case. And there is also the case of using political money to move it through the, foundations and to use religious foundations also as vehicles and conduits to move laundered money. So such is the practice of many of our top leaders that we wonder, how do we combat corruption, definitely, but how do we actually effectively get AMLA enforced, and that lawyers can also play a much more critical role in trying to ensure that as lawyers themselves, we don't get caught in the money laundering cycle. And there's a whole thing about the legal fraternity now and client lawyer privilege as well, that we also need to address in this session today. Because many a time, and now with all these high profile cases, we also know that one of Najib Razak's lawyer is also in court for a money laundering case, for a 9.5 million case. Then you got the case of Abdul Aziz Abdul Rahim. He's charged with 9 counts of money laundering under the same section, Section 41B. So I'd be very curious to know this charge is, this section of the law is very heavily utilized. And Aziz is accused of receiving illegal funds amounting to RM 139 million from 4 companies. And this case is still going on, although he has now applied for his case to be discharged. So there are, okay, so with these 4 cases, I think there's a lot that we can actually learn about the use of AMLA and the compounds in other cases, like in the case of Ahmad Maslan, when he says he did not know and he was a victim of political funding when he got money from 1MDB and he did not know it was coming from unscrupulous sources. So he was also charged for money laundering. But herein lies another issue, which is compounds. You can actually pay your way through to be free. So if you can pay the fine that is imposed on you, then there's no actual criminal charge that is taken against you. Now, these cases I am highlighting is not just to put the high-level politicians out there, but it is also to call them to be accountable. But it is also to show that if the high-level politicians are engaging in money laundering via corrupt activities, then what are we left with? And how then do lawyers actually get into that whole cycle of making sure that the legal fraternity is actually free from all this? So the Pandora Papers was another link. I've just put the 3 people there that you already know who they are. And this includes our current finance minister, although he says that he has already closed the company and so on and so forth. It includes former finance minister Tun Daim Zainuddin and many of these people who have a lot of property in different countries in which there's a lot of cross-border transaction that goes on, and that they also put a lot of their money in offshore accounts. And they put their money in offshore accounts so that they can also invest in the property market in the UK, in New York, and all that. And there's one other issue I just wanted to highlight, which is linked to corruption, money laundering, and what we say grand corruption across the globe is actually about recovery of stolen assets, and how recovery of stolen assets can also be a very important aspect of battling corruption. Recovery of stolen assets can actually be part of actually managing money laundering. Now, internationally, there seems to be a lot of movement now on lawyers. And I think lawyers are now seen as a very critical chain in the money laundering cycle. And because of the legal client-lawyer privilege, lawyers are uncomfortable about actually reporting suspicious transactions, which Encik Bhagat will talk about a lot more. And it's uncomfortable about reporting suspicious transactions because they also have access to their clients' accounts. And how can they divulge information about a suspicious transaction? So this is where, when governments meet, G20 exercise, for example, going to happen in Indonesia, they will be coming up with more standards and mechanisms for lawyers. So what really then is the role of the Bar Council in assisting and helping to make sure that the legal fraternity is safe, is free? So FATF recommendations for lawyers are actually very strong now. How is that actually enforced under our AMLA in the country? And of course, Goal 16.4 and the transnational organized crime talks a lot about illicit flows. And the closing comment from me is that Malaysia is one of the biggest countries of where illicit financial flows occurs. They say it's a lot about trade mispricing, money laundering, and all that kind of stuff. But I think we need to tackle that, because if we are actually letting money leave the country unchecked, there is actually a lot more global push that's needed from our country for this. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. And I'm not sure what to say when Cynthia looks at me and says, "Can you do something about the lawyers?" Yeah, Bar Council, to its amazing credit, is actually very committed to combating AMLA, and they have taken several steps in that direction, where several circulars have been sent out to members of the bar. Bar Council has gone further to train some of us with the Bank Negara Malaysia, and there is a group of lawyers who are actually training as many members as possible on the importance of combating AMLA, on compliances, on how they should actually file their data compliance reports every year, how important it is that they must have a compliance officer in the firm, because we are a reporting institution. The Bar Council is a reporting institution amidst several other institutions. Now, we heard extensively as to how Cynthia has spoken about the connection or the relationship between AMLA and corruption, and our obligations on how reporting must be done. And she has taken us through the existing legal framework. She showed us Section 4 on AMLA, and it was very helpful to see some cases actually to show that these are some of the cases that's currently being tested in Malaysia. So, yes, the question is always asked, you know, if the reporting institutions have this obligation to report to ensure that there is suspicious transactions picked up. What about the larger picture? What's happening to the whole nation? You know, how are we combating financial crimes through AMLA globally? So Malaysia, of course, has got its own national risk assessment, and I'm sure Mr. Kamal is going to talk to us a lot more about how his organization, i.e. the National Anti-Financial Crime Center, is working towards what you call combating, to name a few difficult situations, tax evasions, corruption-related activities, custom duty evasion, smuggling of currencies and other contraband items maybe. Okay, so basically, Encik Kamal, I understand that financial crimes continues to pose significant threats to financial stability and our national economy. Now, what really are your powers? Could you tell us about the National Anti-Financial Crime Center? Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Chad. And then my fellow panelists. First of all, thank you to the Bar Council and C4 for inviting us, in particular NFEC, to this particular session. It's good for us to actually, to introduce you NFEC, okay, National Financial Crime Center, which was, okay, we have the law, National Crime Center Act 2021, which came into force on the 2nd January 2020. So we just about 2 years old. Okay, but the history is that this particular NFEC was actually originated from way back 2011, 2010, when a former AG, Tan Sri Abdul Ghani Patel, and the other three main players introduced Special Task Force. The Special Task Force, the main role that time is actually to combat the money laundering, in particular smuggling and illicit drugs, everything, in particular income tax, custom, everything. So from there, we moved to NARET, National Recovery Asset Team. We just changed the name to the, also focus the same thing. And then come in, the intention actually sooner or later we must have a formal institution that come in, the NFCC. Okay, Alhamdulillah, we have the FCC. Of course, the main function actually, first of all, NFCC is not an enforcement agency. However, the main role of NFCC is a platform for all agencies, enforcement agencies, to come together, to work together in combating crime, financial crime in particular, especially on high impact financial crime, which actually listed under NRA, National Risk Assessment, i.e. the five main offences: organized crime, smuggling, drug trafficking, of course corruption, money laundering, and also synthesis. Actually now we also covers looking at seriously at environmental crime. So actually 6. Okay, but the main 5 and the additional one, because environmental crime also is part of the one of the crimes stated in the NRA, but not the top 5. But because of the public interest, national interest, we also looking at it very seriously on this issue, because environmental crime involves actually 3 elements. The environmental, ada Jabatan Alam Sekitar. We also looking at the wildlife, perkhidmatan, and also lodging, perhutanan. A lot of challenges because we just starting the particular discussion, engagement with all the stakeholders. Okay. Now, come in, what is financial crime? Financial crimes basically under the law actually refer to the schedule of the AMLA. Okay. Now, we now we focus on the topic. STR, Suspicious Transaction Report. Okay. Law says under AMLA section 8, the obligation to report. Then section 14 actually says what is STR. STR first, Suspicious Transaction Report. Actually, when there is there is something suspicious about that particular transaction, the reporting institution, including lawyers, have to report to Bank Negara. I inform my colleagues at MCC. Actually, the MCC's members are varied. We have, for example, myself from AJ Chambers. We have from police. We have from Bank Negara. We have from Lembaga Hasil, and all the main agencies. We sit together. Okay. So from there we share the information, everything. So based on the STR, Suspicious Transaction Report, there is no threshold. When the reporting institution feels that there is something wrong, suspicious about the transaction, you are required to report to the Bank Negara. How? When you can by way of manual or by way of email. And I was informed by my colleague from Bank Negara, if there are lots, then they will give you special access into reporting. Then another one is cash transaction report, 25,000. Maximum, minimum. More than 35,000, obligation to report. But one thing, we have to read together cash transaction report and STR. Sometimes they try to cover below 25, 24. That's why we have section 4, capital A, structured. But they forget about STR. Because, for example, yes, the particular person deal with the transaction below the CTR, cash, 20, 25, 24. But the frequency, today, tomorrow, then because then actually Bank Negara will look or the bank or the reporting institution should know your customer. Okay, how come this particular person make a transaction 24,000 but the frequency one day. Then suspicious, not. Then what happened upon the report, CTR or STR? Bank Negara will call it. And Bank Negara will analyze, they have the analysis, analyze the particular transaction. Of course, they have the information on top, okay, who are the customer, everything. But remember, it's still suspicious. There is no information about the crime. So how they look at it? Then come in engagement from with other agencies, whether there are elements of corruption, money laundering. Of course, money laundering is the bigger one because it's a post predicate. Okay, decided by Azmi Osman and also currently Najib Razak. It's a post predicate. But how to determine? Okay, who should investigate? Who should this particular information be given? Police, custom, anti-corruption, lembaga hasil, or whatever. So they have the tools to check the possibility of this particular person involved, maybe in corruption, maybe sent to corruption. Okay. The moment they send the, for example, because with our focus, STR, corruption. Okay, this upon receiving the STR, CTR, they analyze it. Okay, there is a possibility element of corruption. They send to the MECC. MECC has another team to analyze because it's still maybe the information is transaction, financial information. Where is the element of crime? Nothing. Still, because it's still suspicious. It's still about the now currently the flow of the money, but from where? So they'll go into the detail, okay, whether this particular person has any report. Okay, lodge against him, everything. Then they will do some background checking. Whether there is a possibility of involvement of corruption. But corruption in what sense? Another issue, another challenges. Determine what type of offences, which one? Section 16, 17, 23, or other predicate offences, CBT, whatsoever. Okay. They need to focus at what? They look at the reports. And then come in the power, all the powers of the PP of the all the MC power to inquire information from banking. For example, under AMLA, Section 48. Then Section 49 for us to get the information from the particular person. But to balance between investigation and human rights, right to be to own property, everything. If not, we've been challenged.
Yes.
Okay.
So Encik Kamal, can I just ask you one situation here? You see, as lawyers, we have clients, right? I'm sure that's all our audience here today would want to know this question. I mean, basically, what the government is asking us to do through AMLA is to snitch on our clients.
Yes.
We are supposed to snitch on them. If we snitch on them, we are safe. If we don't snitch on them, we are in trouble. So that is the message that I seem to be getting from this STR, the fact that we have to file this STR. Perhaps you can just help us, especially the legal fraternity out there who's listening to us this morning, as to what are the consequences of not filing an STR if they do have the suspicion, and what sort of trouble they'll get into. If you could probably help us, help them understand their position, that would be helpful, Tuan.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, first of all, of course, when the obligation comes with the repercussion, okay, then there's possibility of criminal charges. Of course, if for example financial, maybe they have the administrative. For example, if for council, maybe we said, okay, this particular legal firm actually has something, can you take administrative action or not against this particular firm? Right. Okay, maybe we engage, maybe we try to engage first. And basically for me, important is the engagement. Okay, we engage with bar council. For example, I know about it because I'm the one who charged Shafi.
Okay, all right, we have got the hero here.
And then, okay, the money is there. Okay, now we have actually basically the reporting about the money actually have a long history. Before this, what you mean by accrual, everything. So actually, the Lembaga Hasil actually engaged with the Bar Council issued circular, everything. Okay, so we engage first. Then if there is a possibility, there is element of failure, then maybe we report to the Bar Council first. Okay, please you engage with your your members. Please advise them to do it accordingly. Because sometimes, in order to charge a person under the law, it's not easy because of the elements, evidence, everything. So that's why we have alternative administrative action. Okay. However, we need to do something. Okay. Maybe perhaps after a certain period of time, we decided, no, we're going to be hard, we're going to charge. As example, okay. Of course, that's why come in the obligation, know your client. Of course, the recent decision of Lembaga Hasil, privilege. Now, how to balance it up is another issue, is another challenge. Okay, now But if the moment you report, now come in the issue of tipping off. Okay, but if you report something suspicious, I don't think we after that we actually tip off our client. Actually, I report you STR. Okay, so that's why, of course, that's why come in the whistleblower, because okay, that's all interrelated. Okay, but however, the bigger picture actually we want to actually try to minimize to control the money, the offences, everything. There is a possibility lawyers become enabler because you receive a lot of money. If we Zahid case, few legal firms, YMDB, SIT also involve few legal firms. So what actually it will affect the image of the lawyers itself. Okay, however, we want to tackle it, but it's not that easy. But that's the challenges for me. That's the challenges, part of challenges. That's why come in. That's one is failure to report. Remember, under section 4(1)(a), engage in money laundering directly or indirectly. So the word is that the key word is indirectly. Directly is okay. Indirectly. Then also there is another abetment. Then also section 4(1)(d), these guys try to impede the original where the source. So all these actors here that Sinta showed just now covers everything. It covers all spectre. For section 4(1)(a), engage directly or indirectly transaction involving money. Very broad. Which cannot be covered under B, C, and D. We cover on A. That's one. Okay, it's okay. That's one. If not, it's not okay. That's the cover. So what we do, okay, now STR, then the agency receive it. Now we look the money trail. Then, for example, if involve government officer, it's quite easy because now we look at the maybe from our GPA in terms of declaration of asset. Okay, how many accounts, everything. So he had to declare. So, but all this information scattered. Then we check from lembaga hasil. What were their return? Then the NACC come in to engage because it's involved MACC, lembaga hasil, and other agencies. We collate the information and share together. And whether we or if, for example, we are unable to pinpoint to corruption, we may pinpoint to lembaga hasil, income tax. So and then, for example, he has property, he bought property, we look at our declaration of asset within the government. So it may not be criminal, but it become administrative action, fail to report. Right. Okay, everything. So from there we work. But the challenges is that how to convert suspicious to become a reasonable ground, reasonable belief at the end prima facie and beyond reasonable doubt. The processes. But we can start it from the STR and CTR. Okay, we look the money trail and locate the criminal, the crime. Sometimes we look from the crime, then we locate the money trail. So it's either way. And also under AMLA, we have tracking, property tracking. So we able to track the money trail, the property. AMLA because we know placement, then layering, placement, integration. Integration become legal. They put in the system that actually cover it as if it's a legal money. Okay, so all these things involve CTR, the STR, and also all is about the tracking of the money. Of course, for example, I involved in most of the cryptocurrency cases. We lost the cases because of we are unable to match or link aliran. If we read the Arif Tanzani decision, yes, a lot of money, aliran wang tunai, but whether this particular money come from the unlawful activity, that's the challenges. It's not easy, but okay, we can wait with the assistance of all, including, for example, now from the lawyers, because you are one of the recruiting institution. So Of course, the challenges, the balance between privilege. So we try to work out.
So what is really the importance of this STR? What is the exact importance of it?
Because of from where the particular money comes. Because that is something. For example, I attended one course by UN in Colombia, Cartagena. So of course, we for 1 week, of course we have the allowance. So the allowance they pay, they transfer it to my account. Not much. After convert is 1,000 plus ringgit Malaysian. But because I'm government official, and how come suddenly I receive money from somewhere, from outside? The bank, that's why Bank Rakyat called me. Right. Cik Kamal, okay, there is a pending transaction amounting to 1,000 plus from this. Can you explain to us from where this money? Right. So I explained. Only okay. So that's the input. So because of that, for example, you're all lawyers. There's something wrong. From where actually your money come from? Tapi how? That's one theory, but into practical, how you going to ask your client? Because if not, he will find another lawyer. Okay. Yeah.
Can I ask you one question, Encik Kamal? In fact, it's questions coming from members out there who are watching this program today. So one of the curious question is, since the formation of the National Financial Crime Center, how many lawyers have reported STRs basically or such transactions? Okay. Do you have any statistics of those?
Okay, no, actually, basically, the counsel, the lawyer did not report to us, but report to Bank Negara.
To
Actually,
Bank
because
Negara,
just now, I together with my colleague from Bank Negara, I asked them how many lawyers actually reporting. Actually, very low.
Very low. So we have some. That's great. We have some.
Actually, please inform them. Please report.
Okay. Okay, that's great. That's great.
So then I asked them how to report. They says okay, by way of manual, way of email, everything. Right. So perhaps Bar Council need to engage Bank Negara.
Sure.
So basically, that's how we work initially. We work the STR, CTR, and to try to locate everything and to justify. At the end, this money come from the unlawful activity.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Encik Kamal. That was really quite engaging, and we learned quite a lot about how the National Anti-Financial Crime Center actually works with the National Coordination Committee. Yeah? There are 17 members of the National Coordination Committee, which involves the Attorney General's Chambers, the Bank Negara Malaysia, Immigration Department. Encik Kamal spoke about the Inland Revenue Board, and so many more, the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission. Now, he's also told us the importance of the STR. Basically, the suspicious transaction reports provides financial intelligence. It's gathering of financial intelligence, and it helps law enforcement agencies with such valuable information for them to act upon and to know what is happening within even the legal profession. So thank you so much for that, Encik Kamal. We really appreciate your presence here and your sharing. Now over to Encik Megat. Encik Megat is a practicing solicitor of 28 years. So that's an amazing number of years in practice. Now, so Encik Megat is here to tell us about the lawyer's role in combating corruption. So Encik Megat, what would you do if I was your client and I brought a bag of 100,000 and I give it to you as my legal fee? How are you going to react to that?
Firstly, to begin with, now it's afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the Bar Council for actually inviting me as one of the speakers, and also to C4 for actually having to organize this particular session and stuff. For me, this is something that is actually required naturally in order for us to be the bastion and also the guardian of the law, and as well ensure that corruption is actually combated. Now, to answer your question, Pushpa, to begin with, the policy of my firm is that we don't accept any cash. That's the first thing that we did.
That's very good.
That's something for which that we have implemented even before the introduction of AMLA itself. And how we actually had such a policy is primarily because we followed Labuan. Basically, Labuan, when it comes to all the financial institutions there, they do not accept cash. So everything would have to be done through the banks, they wire it or whatnot. And that is how, for me, from the very outset, I was thinking that the firm will be able to operate more transparently and even lesser headaches by not actually accepting cash. So as far as possible, we will avoid even paying cash to for any petty claims or anything of such sort. Anything that the pupils require, for example, for parking or even for purchase of any statutory acts of parliament or whatever it may be, they make a claim, we will then actually pay them by transfer of through the bank, through TT and Do It Now and whatnot. Now, it's actually much easier now to actually avoid using cash with the advent of the technology, the internet banking and whatnot. And hence, it will resolve a lot of issues, potential issues when it comes to any possible commission of money laundering. The other problem also for us lawyers that we face, something that is really practical, and being the third speaker itself is always the last but not least, but at the same time also usually the third speaker will have the least to say, primarily because the other two would have said everything that we wanted to say, that I wanted to say, and because of that, there's not much for me to actually talk about, but rather explain or try to share the practical experiences of us who are managing our own firms, the challenges and whatnot. One of the biggest challenges for us who are managing our own firms is that how do you actually balance between making the STR and also whether or not there is a possibility that we could in breach of solicitor client privilege. Now, as we all know, as lawyers, we are governed under Section 126 of the Evidence Act itself, which talks about the solicitor client privilege, which is actually absolute. Now, there is such an overriding provision under the AMLA Act itself, which is Section 20. The problem now is because this particular Section 20 itself has not actually been tested and decided upon by the Apex Court. As opposed to, for example, LHDN, in the recent decision, the federal court has actually ruled that the solicitor client privilege actually applies, and therefore we as lawyers cannot share with LHDN the transactions and whatnot for the client's account. Now we know that with certainty. The worry is that for us to be safe, in abundance of caution, what we do is that we will say we will follow the law as much as we can. So if there is an STR, we need to report, we will do it. But always at the back of my mind, as a lawyer and all that, we have seen for which laws that were actually correct at that point of time, but later on is actually overturned. If I can just take an example, this is not related to corruption or money laundering or things of that sort, is the Ang Ming Lee's decision, the federal court. Developers who have actually applied for extension of time before the signing of the sale and purchase agreement, whereby, well, they followed the law. KPKT was the one who actually approved it. The controller actually gave the extension from 36 months that's provided for statutorily to, let's say, 48 months for the completion of this high-rise. And some of this extension of time also is not actually willy-nilly or just for the fun of it. For example, there are high-rise for which that it's 48 floor, it's duplex, and therefore the units are actually higher, and therefore the buildings will have to actually build higher. And because of that, it's almost impossible to complete within 36 months. And the controller therefore agreed for it to be extended to 48 months. Then suddenly the federal court then said that no, controller don't have any powers and all that. Minister is the one who can actually approve it. And therefore, any extension of time itself is actually void. And because of that, suddenly the developers out of the blue, I'm being saddled, the developers are being saddled by this additional 12 months of LADs for which they have never actually accounted for or even provided for. It's similarly here for us lawyers. Naturally, we are always concerned and worried if, for example, suddenly if the matter were to actually be challenged and tested and all that, goes to the federal court actually says no, 126 of the Evidence Act is absolute, is solicitor client privilege, then what happens to us? That's always that worry for me, Pushpa. It's always a concern as well. And the last thing we would want as practicing lawyers is for us to be liable personally, or even the firm to be liable for such reports that we make. It's always a concern. And hence the reason why I also want to raise this matter, since I can see that my batchmate Ezri is here. I have been raising this for many years. I said, we need to have this LLP, Bar Council. When are we going to have it? We need to have that protection as well. And though it's good for us to talk about all these matters when it comes to STR, money laundering and whatnot, I think the members of the bar, with more and more challenges that we are facing, we would love if it's possible for us to have such a platform, or to have such an entity for which that we will not be personally liable as well. I think that is something for which that I can share from the practical standpoint as a legal practitioner, and the possible challenges and all that. I do understand that under Section 24, the AMLA, it does actually provide for immunity and whatnot. But nevertheless, the concern will always be there. Hopefully that this is something for which that the courts can resolve. Notwithstanding that, of course, I do actually then rely heavily on Section 24 for purposes of knowing that I'm actually immune. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, Encik Megat. Yeah, so the message that comes from our final speaker is that the way forward would be through a cashless manner of running your legal firm, even with petty cash. That comes as a surprise to me because I still use cash for petty cash. But yes, that's something that we can all think about as to how we can go cashless to help combat financial crimes. That's one. Yes, and Encik Megat has also put forth the fact that whilst we have the privilege, we have to protect our client. At the same time, if an STR is necessary, then that has to be done. And we are equally protected when we actually file an STR with the Bank Negara Malaysia. So if it is absolutely necessary, the message is we must do it. Yeah. With that, I think, I don't think there's any other questions we have. Yes, there is one question from Louise Van Burl. Can Tuan Kamal Baharin explain how billions flowed out of nation and Bank Negara did not report? Oh dear. Right. So yes, I think I did address this right at the beginning. It is a concern that we have. That's a question that we all ask, even when we do trainings. Why are you coming here harassing us lawyers to do this, do that, file STR, put in your data compliance report, and the whole works, it's so much as if we don't have enough problems already, and then you want us to do all this extra work and whatnot, So whilst you're asking us to do this, what's happening in the bigger picture? What's happening to the bigger picture? We have got all these problems, all these cases, for example, some of the cases that Ms. Cynthia had highlighted earlier. So where do we stand? So Louis, I don't think even Tuan Kamal has got an answer to that. So I'm not sure whether Kamal wants to say anything at all.
Okay, thank you. Of course, the best person to answer is panel. Okay, but however, there is actually procedures. Okay, when involved into approval level, because when certain level, okay, this particular powers under this particular officers level, and if there is so-called VIP, then the level of approval become up, maybe perhaps towards the governor. For example, okay, so it's not so actually that's the procedures, but what really happened, we don't know. Okay, for example, I purchased a car and then by way of loan, then but the approval quite late, actually delayed for a while. Then I asked why the delay, because I'm under PEP, because I'm the senior government officers. That particular time I'm head of AMLA. Maybe there is something, the criteria is okay, politically exposed person. So when politically exposed person, the approval go to HQ. So actually that's the system, but of course the system is man behind it. So what really happened? That's why. But the system is there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Encik Kamalia. I think that I have to agree with him that we do have a system, and if we look at it from the macro aspect of things, we have the national risk assessment to help our country to look into the risk factors at a national level, at a macro level. But at a micro level, we have reporting institutions who have to carry out their obligations. For example, if you have got clients, it is your obligation to carry out risk-based assessments on your client. You need to know what sort of client you have and what is the risk involved in your transaction with this particular client. That is our obligation. Now, where our country is concerned, we have laws. We have AMLA, we have NACC, the laws are there. And it is our obligation as the Rakyat to actually comply with these obligations and the law. I think it is very difficult. It is, I'm not sure whether we should just keep asking this question about what is happening, what are these people doing, what are that people doing. Let's do what we can do on an individual basis to combat financial crimes. So we have something to add.
Sure. I would just like to add,
sure.
Actually, when it comes to those outflow of funds from the country itself, it's not actually through all this illicit or illegal activities and whatnot. It's actually because this is known as transfer mispricing. What actually happened is that because our tax rate is at 24%, and some of our neighboring countries, the tax rate is at 17%. So there is a 7% difference between the two. So what actually happened previously was that the manufacturing, all those processes, especially manufacturing, would actually be undertaken here in Malaysia. And then what will happen to that particular company itself that actually undertakes such manufacturing is that they will bump up the expenses and all that. These products that they manufacture will then actually be sold to their own company in this neighboring country. And therefore, this neighboring country or this company then in this neighboring country will then sell it to all over the world. So what happens, therefore, that those monies would subsequently then be retained in that company or in the neighboring country, sorry. This is the transfer mispricing for which the LHDN has actually been taking action against. It's not so much of these funds from illegal or illicit activities, because that is actually not as significant as the transfer mispricing that I mentioned earlier. It's just that this practice actually has not been that active when the GST was actually introduced, primarily because then that would have actually lessened the tax rate itself. Because you plus GST itself, it becomes almost 23%. And due to that, there is no longer that incentive for them to undertake such transfer mispricing activity.
Thank you so much for that, Encik Megat. Now, there is just one last question that I'm going to accept. Encik Kamal, again, Encik Kamal, you have a popular one here today. Encik Kamal said there are very few lawyers filing STRs to Bank Negara. Is there an exact figure of how many reports have been filed so far? Do you foresee this number increasing as GE15 approaches?
First of all, okay, I'm sorry, I don't have the number because it's actually privileged under BNM. Okay, and then I'm not the BNM officers.
Sure.
Maybe perhaps if you want to get the number, you may look at the website of the Bank Negara, or maybe perhaps even Bar Council. Actually, Bar Council should know, or should able to, is interested, should be interested to know how many actually reporting. But the Bank Negara officer informed me just now, not many.
Right.
Okay. I don't know whether increase, not necessarily because of GE15. Increase, I hopefully because of the obligation. Our obligation to lodge a report.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Encik Kamal. So I'll take this opportunity to firstly thank Ms. Cynthia, Encik Kamal, and Encik Megat, and also to wish Encik Kamal and Ms. Cynthia's organization all the very best in your continued effort to combat financial crimes. We're really privileged to have all three of you today here. And my parting words as a moderator to members of the bar out there is the Malaysian Bar is doing everything it can to educate its members on the importance of combating financial crimes, how AMLA has to be used to our advantage, and how we need to comply with what we need to do. So I need to stress the fact again that whilst we speak about STR, we do have the DCR, the data compliance reports to be made. So as an reporting institution, legal firms must have a compliance officer, and you must look into the DCR. Please attend the various training that's being run nationwide by the Bar Council through the AMLA committee. So please attend these trainings and help yourself and support the Bar Council as well. Do not be ignorant about these financial crimes and the implications behind these financial crimes. With that, I thank and I end this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pushpa Ratnam, and also the impressive panelists that actually handled very challenging questions from the participants. We slightly overran our time, and we understand today some of you could be rushing to go for your Friday prayers. So because of that, we will actually start our afternoon session a few minutes later at 2:15. So we appreciate if you all can enjoy your lunch and be back by 2:15 for session 3, Reforming the MACC, the Need for New Efforts, with panelists Andrew Khoo and Tricia Yeo. And we hope to see you back shortly. So have a good lunch and see you back here at 2:15. In the meantime, any of you who missed out scanning the QR code to be part of the C4 Center Whistleblower Support System, the QR code is now up again. So please do scan if you can. See you back here shortly.
Thank you so much, Kamal.